This manhwa story begins with an image of a boy with blonde hair and an angry expression. A master swordsman is furious, and shattered mirrors are trapped in his room. He holds a weapon in one hand and a flower in the other, showing that he's on the brink of madness. He is the useless eldest son of Count Pertium, a young man who has abandoned his talents to live locked away in a room. Now, the greatest knight of the north is being defeated by human trash while kneeling before his enemy, nearly surrendering. He hears that a lot of money has been spent on the trap. A man in armor asks who this is. With a weapon resting on his shoulder, the man looks down with a sarcastic gaze. He asks if the man in front of him likes it. Meanwhile, the furious blonde guy screams. Calling Gizlane a piece of human trash, the armored man confirms his identity. He reveals that there's much more to it. He also claims to know everything about the armies, and about how many they have lost and who the spies are that are continuously being supplied. Their entire plan has been completely destroyed like a Russian doll with many layers. Lord Gizlane's blue gaze extends towards the defeated man, who has screamed out. While showing signs of serious battle wounds, he howls in agony. Unable to believe he's just a pawn in the enemy's hands, refusing to accept his defeat and to silence the enemy. Lord Gizlane has placed his foot on the man's face, intending to silence him forever. From above, he looks down after kicking him away with force. After all, he has thrown his mask to the ground, saying they can try to invade his territory as many times as they want, then claiming to have a reason. He knows all the plans, and now, the young Lord Gizlane has been revealed. All of this happened a year ago in the kingdom of Lutania, near the Pertium estate. With that, the protagonist awakens trembling in a bed. Looking at his hands, confused about what is happening, he raises his hand to his neck and realizes it's still intact, confirming that he is alive, even though he knows that's impossible because just a few minutes ago, he was in a fierce battle. On a battlefield where many swords are seen on the ground, he fought against someone as strong as him. Even so, his face bears many old scars and new wounds. He was brutally beaten by his opponent, and his body has shown it's reached its limit. After 2 heavy hits, he has bent down. While the red-haired man asks if he's not the King of Mercenaries, one of the 7 strongest on the continent. That red-haired man, who asked if the battle has ended, is also one of the strongest on the continent. The noble knight Aiden points his sword at the defeated foe, asking if there are any last words. The main character declares that his goal is to seek revenge, looking at him with hatred and disdain, wishing that the despicable redhead would die too, thus ending the Mercenary King. The protagonist's opponent thinks he is arrogant even in his final moments on Earth. Still pointing the sword, he says, the protagonist abandoned his family after his sister's death. At that moment, he glares at him with rage. He questions how he could know that, since he comes from another kingdom. The man admits he shouldn't say, but continues to confess, that he has been working behind the scenes for a long time to find him, a smile on his face. That redhead states they work for the House of Delphine and have done everything to destroy his family. The protagonist hangs his head, unable to utter a word at the word we. He realizes there is a conspiracy behind the Duke of Delphine's house, and only now, in these final moments, does he discover the truth. The red-haired man looks down from above, saying there's no need for explanations. After all, he will die with his eyes wide open. The protagonist screams that he will never forgive that bastard, evident in the redhead's eyes, that he doesn't care about carrying the enemy's hatred, and to end it all, he separates the protagonist's head from his body. With that massive sword, the protagonist now looks at his reflection in the water barrel, and realizes he is still intact. He touches his face, thinking it's all just an illusion, but notices he looks younger than usual, now looking around. He wonders if he's been taken hostage or used as a test subject, but those thoughts fade as someone calls his name, shouting. Young Master Ricardo, a Pertium soldier, entered the tent to check if the young master had woken up. He is startled by a sword suddenly appearing, held by someone standing behind him. Acting like a madman, the protagonist declares he will let the man live without answering his question. But he also says that's not guaranteed. He might change his mind, leaving the soldier confused about what the young master is doing. At that moment, Ricardo asks if he doesn't think he has crossed the line, that he could simply say he doesn't want to follow him. The young blonde man holding the sword observes the man's reaction as unusual and wants to know more. Regardless, Ricardo quickly walks away, while he has the chance to ask if he's still angry. Grabbing his neck, Ricardo asks if he has forgotten everything he has done. After a short nap, the protagonist feels strange hearing that he has been angry, and also refused to lead a group in the orc attack. He was annoyed and said he would never get angry. That's ridiculous. But Ricardo insisted he heard it. The protagonist listened as the man said he would take his stuff and that they were on their way to somewhere. Ricardo was clearly very upset, saying they were returning to the Pertium estate. Everything was getting more confusing for the protagonist, who was now watching the man out of the corner of his eye. Tense, yet angry, he grabbed Ricardo's shoulder and asked him to repeat it. He wanted to know if the man was talking about the ruins of what was once left. However, when he finally got there, he saw the castle and the simple houses. As before, he realized that everything was still really there. and the land wasn't burned down like before. Ricardo moved closer and whispered that calling it a ruin was a bit strange. Now the protagonist had to make sure he wasn't dreaming, so he pinched his cheek to check. After pinching hard and feeling pain, he realized it wasn't a dream, and Ricardo had a strange expression. Once again, the debris like broken mirrors returned in his memory. Now the land was whole, as if everything had turned back in time, and he had another chance to make things right. He knew that when he was young, he had a deep resentment towards his family and was very immature. He constantly got angry because he felt insecure, and that led to problems. People began to avoid him because they couldn't stand his criticism. He had run away from home. Many years later, he became a mercenary. Surviving countless battles and improving his skills, he had made a name for himself, returning to the district to fix the mistakes of the past, but his home was in ruins. All he found was traces of destruction, fire, and a tattered flag. Looking at the flag now, everything was as it should have been in the past. All the people he loved were still there. He felt satisfied and couldn't believe his luck, to the point that he wanted to sing a happy song. But it was too early to celebrate. He looked at Ricardo and remembered he had talked about the orcs. He couldn't forget that day. That was the day when most of the army would die. Everything would turn into a horrifying scene, where all or most of them would die. In his past life, he had watched the orc attack team, and in a desperate attempt to make a name for himself, the report said there were only 3 orcs, but when they arrived, there were over 20 orcs, and most people died because he was too stubborn. Now he had the chance to win, because those orcs had no strategy. He believed that the main issue now was to earn the trust of the people, because at this point he was seen as useless. Then he noticed something flying towards him. It was a piece of a wooden observation tower that had been thrown out. With that, the soldiers began to scream in panic that the orcs had arrived, and as soon as they arrived, they started attacking the soldiers. Everyone was stunned. The protagonist thought it was still too early, believing they should have arrived a bit later. Based on his previous life, everything had turned into a vast battlefield. Most of the soldiers were being overwhelmed. A sharp voice yelled that they needed to form ranks. The man running at high speed was the commander of the Chauvin assault team. Even he realized that the situation had spiraled out of control. There wasn't much anyone could do when they looked at the terrain. They realized they had been careless and ambushed when they least expected it, and many orcs suddenly appeared. He jumped and looked to the side because someone was shouting, trying to get his attention. A giant orc was about to attack him when someone yelled for him to watch out. From a distance, the protagonist saw the orc about to attack, so he rushed towards it, moving so fast it was almost unnoticeable. As he got closer, he placed a hand on the commander's shoulder, who was startled to see the young man and the orc. The protagonist pushed the commander back and jumped in front of the orc. Falling backward, the old commander was still in shock. Unable to comprehend the reason for such a sudden action, he stood still and watched the battle unfold before him. He noticed that the young master had acted strangely right from the first strike. He had ensured that he would attract the attention of the orcs, creating a gap. That was how he severed one of the orc's limbs, causing it to scream in agony. The old commander was stunned by the sight. The guards also couldn't believe what they were seeing. The orc stood before them with a missing limb, screaming, before it fell down from a few more strikes from the protagonist. Holding the sword, he said he still couldn't use mana, and wished he could go back further in time. Approaching the man, he asked if he was the commander, while the man nodded. Pointing at the commander, he demanded that he hand over something. The man looked at the young boy, confused about what he wanted. Finding his behavior strange, he hesitated. The young master declared that he wanted the commander's authority, and the commander observed the protagonist carefully. He even began to sweat upon realizing the naivety of the young man. He clearly knew that the young man lacked experience, but risking the lives of others was unacceptable. So he calmly stood up and said he couldn't allow that action to happen. Curious and somewhat annoyed, he remarked that life shouldn't be treated like a game. Meanwhile, the protagonist just watched the commander leave, noticing his extremely uncomfortable and unpleasant attitude. At that moment, another orc appeared, ready to ruthlessly crush the seasoned commander. The commander's first reaction was to order the young man to retreat immediately because he would handle everything. However, the young man raised his sword, declaring that he hadn't received any acceptable options. He then threw his sword in a straight line, forcing the commander to dodge to avoid getting hit. Filled with intense rage, the commander grabbed the young man's collar, demanding an explanation for such behavior while shouting angrily, furrowing his brow. He suddenly realized that something strange and unexpected had just happened. He quickly looked over to where the orc stood and was completely stunned. He could clearly see the precision of the sword embedded in the middle of the skull. The sight left no doubt that the young man possessed incredible swordsmanship skills. In just a few seconds, the giant orc fell to the ground, leaving the commander utterly amazed. He wondered how the foolish and unrefined son of the Count could achieve such an absurd feat. Immediately, the protagonist asked the commander if he knew what was most important in a battle. Meanwhile, in another place, the soldiers were trembling in fear, surrounded and completely unable to defend against the brutal slaughter happening on the other side. The orcs demonstrated complete superiority, mercilessly humiliating each desperate soldier. The remaining warriors were mentally crushed, lacking any physical, mental, or strategic support on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the young man with blonde hair and blue eyes spoke about the motivation and determination needed, then decided to take action. Pulling the sword out of the defeated orc's skull, he charged into the battlefield, showcasing impressive skill and agility in that brutal context. He stood courageously among the orcs and the warriors, demonstrating his full leadership ability. His stance not only astonished the observing soldiers but also left the commander completely stunned. Without hesitation, he drew a sword from a nearby orc and invited others to join the fight. With a sharp and cutting voice, he declared that he would eradicate the evil he had caused. With that, sensing his overwhelming aura, the remaining orcs began to scream in rage. Trying to threaten him in every way, they all attempted to attack the young blonde man together, in desperate hope of stopping his assault, but the protagonist continued to surprise the commander, who was left utterly speechless witnessing such extraordinary feats. The commander looked on in disbelief as the slender young man, executing moves that even mana users can't replicate. Yet from afar, he could see that the boy with the sword was utterly exhausted, but he admired how the young man used minimal movements to dodge the attacks coming his way. He also noticed that the boy's swordsmanship, focused on exploiting weaknesses, was very precise. The slender and agile young man behaved exactly like a swordsman, even though he wasn't using mana. With wide eyes full of amazement, the commander wondered if humans could achieve something greater. Meanwhile, the protagonist was shouting taunts at the enemy, asking if that was all they had. Easily dodging every attack, he mocked them, saying they weren't worthy of the reputation of a warrior race with that. The soldiers realized that the young master was drawing all the orcs towards himself, while the other soldiers screamed in desperation, pleading for the commander to take action and take control of the situation. However, the commander was completely stunned, unable to comprehend what the young master was doing. The protagonist charged towards a group of orcs, attracting their full attention. He had no intention of running away, because that direction led to the castle and the cliff. At that moment, the commander finally realized the cleverness of the plan to lure the orcs to the cliff edge. He immediately turned pale, mouth and eyes wide open. Unable to believe that the young man would attempt something so extreme, he urgently ordered the army to erect a barrier. As quickly as possible, he also announced that they would follow immediately, the firstborn's son, clearly pointing to the protagonist. Meanwhile, the young man continued to run, followed by a heavily armed and dangerous group of orcs, running with determination. He was still confident that the commander understood his plan. At the same time, he tried to keep all the orcs close to the treacherous cliff. He realized that his stamina was nearly depleted, so he had to win through strategy alone as more and more orcs appeared and tried to regroup. Their communication became more chaotic, until one of the orcs noticed something strange happening. Right behind them, when they looked back, they saw the commander and a few soldiers standing with spear and shield. The protagonist also saw exactly what was happening, and a swift smile appeared on his face. With that, the protagonist jumped back to let the orcs face the soldiers and the commander as he fell from the cliff. He thought that from now on, everything would be handled by the commander. The commander, on the other hand, yelled in despair for the army to execute the standard procedure that had been established earlier. The army then easily surrounded the orcs, taking advantage of their proximity to the cliff edge. The commander was the first to push with the shield and stab with the spear. Quickly, all the soldiers followed his lead, pushing the orc horde directly towards the cliff without hesitation. One by one, the orcs began to fall like ripe fruit from an ancient tree. Despite being completely exhausted, the soldiers celebrated their victory. Having eliminated all the enemy orcs, the commander then ran to the edge of the cliff, frantically shouting for the fallen junior. That's when he saw the young man clinging to the hilt of a sword. Stuck near the cliff edge, the look in the young man's eyes conveyed overwhelming confidence. Compared to someone with extraordinary skills, from above, the commander saw. That gaze carried a very specific and profound meaning, causing a faint and hesitant smile to appear spontaneously. On the hardened face of the old commander, he immediately began to stretch out his body, reaching out his hand and arm to help him stand up quickly, but it was almost too late. The young man's weak hands slipped off the sword hilt in a tragic moment. He fell, something both the commander and the protagonist didn't want to witness, watching the young lady slowly fall. The commander froze in fear at that crucial moment. As he fell, he heard someone calling his name. It was a sweet, familiar, and known voice. As he looked towards the image that appeared, he was surprised to see Helena, his sister, in fragments of memory. She appeared curled up, trembling and crying bitterly, feeling his absence. She also gently thanked him. Acknowledging that he always tried to be by her side in other memories, she sobbed innocently, asking what she had done wrong to suffer so much. There were also memories of her turning her back, saying he was the bad guy. All those painful memories clearly brought forth Helena's image. His little sister had long passed away with shards like glass in hand. He realized those were precious memories of Helena. At that moment, something yanked at his arm. While a childish voice called him brother, it was his sweet and gentle sister. still a child, holding his hand and pleading for him to go with her slowly. He opened his eyes and found himself in a completely strange place, not quite understanding where he was. He immediately jolted awake upon seeing the simple and strange room he didn't recognize from recent memories. Looking at his hands, he thought that if he was alive, he must have miraculously survived. For a brief moment, he thought maybe it was all just a dream or merely an illusion. However, the intense pain spreading throughout his body proved that it was all real. Clutching his stomach, he felt every muscle and bone in his body aching to their maximum limit. Then someone opened the door, surprised to see him awake. Although clearly in pain, the girl with slightly pinkish white hair smiled. Happy to see the master awake, she looked closely at the woman's figure. He immediately recognized from her appearance that it was Belinda. Thinking he should tell her everything right away, because the truth couldn't be kept hidden any longer, he revealed that he had died multiple times, and somehow had come back to life now. The girl was surprised and laughed. Many seemed to find that revelation completely ridiculous and extremely funny while adjusting the bed sheets. She commented that he really seemed to have been through a lot, but then she became extremely angry. She scolded him sternly because she thought he was lying, also saying he couldn't take risks like that, because if not, he might not survive. She was clearly referring to the festival, reminding him that with such severe injuries, he might miss the event. At that moment, he remembered the festival, realizing that the date was approaching. With her arms crossed, she realized he had forgotten, then reminded him that Helena was eagerly looking forward to it. Looking at a photo on the table, he heard Belinda say this was a great opportunity to get closer. He slowly approached the photo, holding the frame in his hand. Remembering the city's traditional annual festival, he recalled how he used to lock himself in his room, avoiding festivals and events in the past. That's why he held the photo frame tightly. He became serious and asked how much time was left before the event. She calmly replied it was only about a week. While he remained silent, turning away, he knew that was the day that would change his life forever. Then, he heard footsteps approaching and someone asking if he was inside. Knocking lightly on the door, glancing sideways, he recalled the painful memory of his sister still haunting him. In the memory, it was Helena. Sweet and smiling brightly, she held his hand tightly, pleading for him to come with her. It was an unforgettable memory, hard to overlook, the past stubbornly staying in the present. He knew very well that exactly 1 week after that moment, his beloved little sister would tragically pass away. Now, he only looked at the vivid memory, carrying in his heart the burden of a cruel and unavoidable fate. Suddenly, he stepped forward and hugged his sister tightly as if he hadn't seen her for many years. That action even startled the maid who had been smiling at him before. Little Helena asked him what was happening and if it was a joke. When he placed his hand on her shoulder, he heard her say that she missed him. Frightened, she pushed him hard enough that he fell on top of the maid, saying she was scared of his actions. Holding his chest, he thought she had quite a strong grip for a little kid. With a serious face, she told him she was staying here because Belinda had asked her to. And she looked at him with an annoyed expression, reminding him of the day he yelled at her to leave. Saying she was doing something inappropriate, the main character touched his neck and felt embarrassed, because he didn't even remember acting that way. When he apologized, both the maid and the girl were startled. When he heard his sister say that he took a cluster from the oak tree, he immediately said that wasn't true. His whole body ached and it was hard to keep pretending. Soon, the pain overwhelmed him. He bent down, trembling from the intense pain, and his sister thought he couldn't defeat the orcs. He had to witness both the maid and his sister laughing crazily at him, thinking he was just a weakling despite being mocked. He still felt satisfied because everyone was just like in his memories. He just didn't understand why. His past had done many foolish things like pushing his little sister away. How could he refuse to go to the festival with his sister, especially since it was the last time he saw her alive? After that, he only found her remains along with her bodyguards, who couldn't protect her. That memory weighed heavily on his conscience and he believed he should have been by her side all along. Then someone knocked on the door asking if they could come in, and since no one expected that, everyone turned to the door. A few soldiers walked in. They were Elena's bodyguards. Then the younger sibling asked them what was going on, since she had told them to wait outside. The protagonist heard the bodyguards asking if she could supervise their work, and he found that strange. So he asked Belinda why his sister had to do that, and she explained that there were too few maids. He couldn't just stand by while Helena went out with her 2 bodyguards. Not when he himself in the past didn't even know she was working. In fact, he didn't want her to go alone, and had asked to join her and help. It all sounded strange, and she looked back, and just stared at his face with suspicion. Belinda also found it strange that he volunteered to do something, and his sister thought that the hit on the head could be more serious. Still, the preparations for the festival had to proceed as usual. When all the maids saw the young master approaching, they began to talk to each other. She quickly jumped onto her brother, asking him to be quiet. He found his sister's sudden action strange as she pushed his face with her hand. He remembered that the incident involving her happened far from the festival. To prevent that, he needed to know the entrances and exits of the castle before any further assessments. While the two siblings were stuck in that situation, his sister tried to stop him from helping anyone and called him back. He realized it was a familiar person and searched his memory to identify who it was. He quickly recognized it was Mr. Fergus, and the man looked tired from running around looking for news. He looked at the young master to see if he was okay, and wanted to know if he really fought the monster. He told him he just arrived in time. Because my brother has been acting strange, he's tired of being treated like this. But he needs to learn more about the castle, so he asked the old man if there were any abandoned training areas in the castle and said he wanted to go there. He sent a friendly greeting and asked for the reason, saying that he would start training alone. Fergus carefully watched the young master and couldn't believe what he was hearing. Nonetheless, he showed the two around the castle, and it seemed like they were heading somewhere. As soon as they arrived, the protagonist felt strange because he had no memories of that place, and upon entering, he felt this was the perfect place to train. He had never had such privileges before. The equipment was amazing, and he had never seen anything like it for him. When he was just a mercenary, Fergus had entrusted the young master that he had left the place untouched in case he wanted to use it. The man looked at the young master and thought that no matter what happened, he would overcome it. A memory resurfaced, and he knew that in the past, that person had also trusted him. Now, he finally understood what had happened and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. He told him that he should live long. The young man knew that this man was very wise, and remembered him from past experiences. He also recalled that the man had not trusted him before, but now he was saying goodbye, promising to stand by him forever. Looking at the man, he didn't understand why he had treated others like enemies in the past. Now calmer, he thought of the maid, his sister, and Fergus, knowing they were all his friends. He knew he had a week to change the future and protect his sister's life. He remembered that at that time, it had been revealed that one of the lords from a neighboring land had some responsibility for his sister's death, and that was why the city had been ravaged by war and ultimately fallen into ruin. Knowing that the protagonist surely that his sister's death had been the beginning of the family's decline. Now, he had the chance to fix everything, protect his sister, and prevent another war. But first, he needed to improve his physical condition, and that made him sad because time was running out. His first step was to control his mana, so he began to breathe properly. Sitting in the middle of that place, he believed that mana was a supernatural power that allowed humans to surpass their limits. He remembered meditating many times, even on the battlefield and amid chaos. Now he had to focus, so he clasped his hands together and began to summon mana. A person like him, who had led through thousands of battles, would have no difficulty in creating a mana core, his face showing signs of many past attempts, and he seems to be tense trying to materialize mana. He remembers learning everything from a burned magic book that he found many years ago. He knows that a mana core is natural for humans, and he has succeeded in creating 2 cores. He believes he can create a second core and possibly a third, forming connections between them. And when he succeeds in doing that, his expression completely changes. He looks like he's summoning an overwhelming power. He was so tense maintaining 3 cores that he eventually ended up with a nosebleed. So he slightly bent forward and fell out of the ideal posture. Reaching the limit with 3 cores, it's a shame because he had previously reached 5 cores. This had granted him explosive power. He recalls the battlefield, and knows that he failed because he couldn't expand the cores. Wiping his nose, he thinks he needs to improve that technique. Even if there isn't much time, he doesn't want everything to happen again, like it did in his past life. He won't let that bastard in the Delphine house get away, nor the accomplices who destroyed his country escape punishment. With that, a week has passed and the festival day has arrived. He has prepared himself with a belt and a few items he might need if he has to fight. He hasn't even left his sword behind because he has no plans to be caught off guard. His sister notices he looks surprised and his eyes widen seeing her there. She crosses her arms and whispers that she thought he wouldn't go, that he seemed a bit crazy after the hit to the head. Looking at him, she says he seems different and that she's heard he has been practicing alone. A bit embarrassed, he scratches his neck and says there's nothing strange about that. Since he is almost at the succession path, the protagonist was taken by surprise when his sister reminded him that he always said their father was annoying. Still, she smiles and seems pleased with how things are going. Sighing, she says as if her old brother has returned. Those words made the protagonist just stare at the girl without saying anything. Even he felt that in just a week. He has made many changes in the present that could affect the future. As they walked, Belinda advised the ladies' guards to always keep an eye on her. The protagonist thinks that the chain of events will be similar and views everything like a chess game. He has good pieces, but needs to be precise with every move. All his preparations are complete. So he looks back at his belt. His sister is acting like a child, going from this place to that, without staying long at any stall. She continuously pulls him to the next one, because she wants to try everything at the festival, the two of them together, and the girl, sitting on the steps, says that nothing seems different this year. The protagonist thinks it's strange that, as the festival is about to end, nothing has happened. Someone approaches her. and the main character hears that person say they want to show her other areas. The knight tells the girl that some friends have prepared new things in other parts of the festival. The girl excitedly leaves holding the knight's hand, saying it will be fun to see the new things. Her brother and the main character keep a sharp eye, now certain that her bodyguards are involved. To him, it was clear that they were the traitors who caused his sister's death in a past life. And who would have guessed that Helena's bodyguards, Jamal and Phillips, were the real traitors? The main character, watching closely, knew that the story about them dying while protecting her was a lie. He looked at them with a firm belief that they were the traitors of the kingdom, and for that reason, he would never allow those two to be alone with Helena. Under any circumstances, when they arrived at a certain location, one of the bodyguards raised his hand and announced that they had arrived, pointing to a completely desolate area, with no stalls, no people, not even a trace of the grand festival. The girl looked extremely disappointed, looking around but seeing nothing different. She suspiciously asked why the place looked abandoned, filthy, and empty, and with no signs of activity, the bodyguard replied with a forced smile that some very interesting things would arrive there soon. The main character remained extremely alert, carefully observing as he fully understood their suspicious behavior. Although the terrain seemed desolate at first glance, his mercenary experience revealed something entirely different. He knew that the place hid obstacles and all possible escape routes were blocked. Suddenly, his sister pulled his arm hard, startling him and filling him with fear. Meanwhile, the bodyguard tried to convince the girl to stay, but she firmly refused while being pulled away. The brother asked her if she had been practicing secretly lately. However, she was interrupted when one of the bodyguards stepped in, blocking everything with a strange expression on his face. The man said they should wait a little longer. Phillips was surprised to notice. He was speaking in an aggressive and disrespectful tone towards her. Observing everything, the main character clearly saw that both Jamal and Phillips were acting strangely. Jamal scratched his neck saying he didn't want to scare her, but that he had received certain orders. While saying this, he smiled ominously, with a manic expression that would send chills down anyone's spine. The girl, clearly scared, asked desperately what kind of orders and who had given them. Not long after, the one responsible for those orders finally appeared at that very spot. This mysterious person was accompanied by two others, one of whom wore a hat and a long coat. The man in the hat with long hair praised the bodyguards, saying they had done very well. After that, Jamal approached the man and informed him that he had brought the young girl. Just as requested, however, the man was surprised to see Pertium's eldest son. Accompanying the girl, he said with delight that he didn't recall requesting the young boy to come along. When he looked at the girl clinging tightly to her brother's arm, clearly seeking protection. Jamal then declared that he would personally take care of the boy since he innocently followed them. The main character then directly asked Jamal if he truly believed he would escape this betrayal. Jamal coldly replied that the boy should worry more about saving his own life. Meanwhile, a quick glance at the kingdom showed the soldiers and other subordinates were exhausted, wanting to leave that place in their own thoughts. Jamal was sure there were hundreds of others ready to desert without wasting time. The main character threw Jamal to the ground with a precise strike before he could react. The traitor never expected to be attacked. Suddenly and completely caught off guard, he was quickly subdued by his sister and another guard. Phillips was stunned by the actions of the young boy. Even the long-haired man in the hat recognized that the boy was unusual. After the strike, the main character declared that they would never sell anyone. Saying this with his back turned, he then turned around to face Phillips, unleashing his fury and making it clear that he would not hesitate anymore. Realizing the situation, Phillips reacted quickly. He tightly hugged the girl and tried to use her as a shield. However, the main character was a trained mercenary, and immediately drew his sword and threw it. Phillips would never believe he would be hit in the forehead by a sword thrown from a distance. The boy then ran to his sister's side, using mana to carefully extract the blade lodged in the traitor. Meanwhile, the two men accompanying the man in the hat observed. Seeing the impressive boy, the man in the hat and glasses assessed based on appearances that he was right. This was the young master, thoroughly analyzing the entire scene. He realized that the boy was displaying astonishing abilities by using advanced mana techniques. Helena, completely terrified, clung to her brother and desperately asked what was happening there. He then gently struck her neck just enough to make her faint and not witness what would happen next. With great caution, he cradled his sister and laid her on the ground. Protecting her from what was about to happen, the man in the hat watched all of this. Thanking the boy for doing the job for them, slowly approaching, the man remarked that the boy was quite different from what everyone had said while calmly smoking a pipe. He asked if the boy had been hiding his true abilities all this time. The protagonist gripped his sword tightly. He asked directly what the man was interested in regarding his abilities, handling the sword blade with precision. He thought he was facing 3 enemies and needed to think quickly. The 2 men accompanying the man were not ordinary. They exuded an unreasonable amount of mana. The protagonist was ready for his abilities, thinking he needed to end this as soon as possible, however, before starting. He wanted to ask who exactly ordered them to carry out such a cruel act, but upon hearing this, The man coldly replied that he refused to say anything. He clarified that he had no intention of talking because his plan was simply to eliminate the boy immediately. The protagonist was not shaken, but released a massive amount of mana. Demanding an answer ruthlessly, one of the men asked the leader whether they should kill him, but the leader said no. The man's true intention was to capture the boy alive, to make him endure a lot of pain to become stronger. Right after that, two people charged directly at him, clearly intending to kidnap him. However, the protagonist had anticipated this attack and had a well-prepared plan. Without hesitation, he quickly pulled something from his belt, something strategically prepared for that moment. He threw the object at the two enemies, aiming precisely while remaining completely alert. Upon seeing it, the man thought it was just a firework meant to distract them. However, the object struck one of their faces hard, shattering and releasing a thick smoke. When the man opened his eyes, he realized too late that the protagonist had hit his forehead. The second one tried to react to protect his teammate, but he was also caught. As the boy was very alert, the attack was very fast and precise, and the protagonist easily blocked the strike from behind, tracking every movement of the opponent closely. So he could react at the exact moment without revealing himself. He grasped the man's arm, securing their sword with his own blade, completely overwhelming that desperate effort. Thus, within seconds, the man was stripped of his sword, completely unable to defend himself and about to fall. Showing no mercy, the protagonist quickly ended the fight, freeing the opponent from pain with a single blow. However, he quickly realized a greater danger was approaching. Someone was about to attack him brutally from behind. The attack came with full force, but only hit the sword that the protagonist held behind his back. The man was very surprised, unable to imagine that the boy could block it even in such a disadvantageous position. Then he realized that the protagonist's move was perfect, a stealthy block executed brilliantly without wasting any time. He moved towards the boy, believing he could do what others couldn't. With two swords drawn, the protagonist swiftly grabbed the vial from the man's mouth. In the following moments, the man tried to deliver a deadly blow, but the boy quickly bent down to dodge. Expertly defending himself, the protagonist used his two swords to block the fierce attacks, and as quick as lightning, he still received a light cut on his neck. Realizing that with so little mana left, he would die immediately. Still defending himself, he thought about how this man had too much resistance. Even after taking many direct hits, the enemy continued to glare at him, saying he couldn't understand how the boy mastered such a strange swordsmanship style. The man smiled wickedly and declared with conviction that the boy would not survive until morning, and with that, the man advanced towards the protagonist, claiming he would never lose with an uncontrolled laugh. He made it clear that he would destroy the boy that very day. However, there was also a smile on the protagonist's face, showing he was enjoying every moment. This made the man extremely anxious as he noticed the mocking smile on that confident face. Not long after, the protagonist executed an incredibly quick move, impressively combining defense and attack. The move was so fast that the man didn't even notice the perfectly executed steps, so he quickly stepped back, keeping his distance while trying to think of his next move. Adjusting his hat and with broken glasses, he said that dirty mana was ineffective. However, his faith changed as he began to cough incessantly, realizing too late that he had been seriously injured. The pain from the wound was so severe that his body began to weaken, hunched over while coughing continuously. Looking at his trembling hands, he simply couldn't believe what he was witnessing. As the man writhed in pain on the ground, the protagonist calmly approached him. As he walked, he exuded a dense aura and an undeniable killing intent. Now, knowing who was behind this, he vowed to make the man pay. With a cold gaze, he ordered the man to prepare, for he would unleash his third core. Even though he tried his best to understand, the man couldn't believe that such a young boy could raise his mana. So much so that with his swords drawn, the protagonist advanced quickly. Aiming straight at the head of the terrified enemy, the man's mocking smile had completely vanished. Only pure fear remained on his face. Even as a skilled fighter, it was hard for him to stop the relentless attacks. The protagonist poured all his strength into every blow, fighting like it was his last day. His opponent was completely at a disadvantage with each hit. As the boy fought with a desire for revenge in his heart, the man was shocked to realize his hands were starting to go numb. By merely blocking the continuous attacks, he understood that it didn't matter how much mana he had. Every person has a clear limit. The fact that his sword was starting to show cracks was a reality he had to face. Something he had never imagined in his life. He had never heard of anyone being able to expand and control mana in such a way. Looking at the protagonist, he concluded that the boy had completely transformed into someone entirely different in the next move. The protagonist finally succeeded in completely shattering the enemy's blade. Then he realized that not only the blade, but he had also struck directly at the man's body. The protagonist's gaze, filled with hatred, clearly showed that he wouldn't stop at just one hit. So he delivered several more slashes, determined to ensure the man wouldn't survive in any way. Overcome with unbearable pain, the man opened his mouth to scream and cough violently. The protagonist then struck his neck with his hand, determined to silence the man forever. Pushing the man against the wall, he declared that they would finish the unfinished conversation right there. With brutal strength, he slammed the man against the wall, demanding to know who had compelled him to do this. A man named Sargasso had no plans to die easily, so he drew a small blade hidden in his sleeve, believing that even in this situation, he could complete the job by quickly throwing the knife at the child. However, as he attempted to throw, he was surprised to find himself completely bound by dense strands of mana. The protagonist tightened his grip even further, simultaneously preventing any desperate attempts. He coldly ordered him not to try any more foolishness and to answer all his questions immediately. The confused man simply couldn't believe that kids like this could possess so much mana and actually exist in this world. He then remembered that at the start of the fight, the boy's energy had seemed insignificant and irrelevant. While thinking, he felt the protagonist tighten the sword lodged in his stomach even harder without receiving any answers. The boy warns that if he insists, he will directly destroy his mana core. At that moment, the man realizes that the boy is definitely not someone he can bargain with. The protagonist begins to gather mana in a completely different way, causing the man to panic and despair. He screams as he feels his mana core starting to crack rapidly, as if a glass ball is shattering. With all its contents spilling out, the frightened man shouts that the boy is completely insane. Because that could cause a massive explosion, the boy looks straight into his eyes, responding that death is for the weak and he knows exactly what he's doing. The man has experienced enough to immediately understand that the boy is not someone who threatens with mere words. As he looks into the young master's eyes, he feels for the first time the true taste of fear. Desperately, he screams that everything was ordered directly by that despicable Marquis. Desmond trembles, confirming that it is indeed the case. It was the Marquis who hired him to provoke a conflict in that territory, and the protagonist looks at the man, concluding that everything that has happened is the fault of Marquis Dan. He remembers that in his past life, only those who challenged the Duchess faced this. Grabbing the man's neck tightly, he declares that now everything is clear. They tried to kill his sister as predicted. When the man opens his mouth, the protagonist handles the task of finishing him off. Terrified, the man asks why he is doing this if he promised to let him live. However, the protagonist replies that just like him, he also knows how to lie very well when he wants to. As the man begins to laugh strangely, the protagonist senses something is off. Approaching closely, face to face, the man says that his job is done. He also claims that no one will believe the words of a mere mercenary. With no real credibility, however, the protagonist ignores everything. Grabbing his head and saying he will share a little secret, he claims he has died and been reborn in this body. And this time, everything will be completely different and fair, right after he blows up that man's mana core. Causing a completely devastating explosion, the blast is so powerful it can be seen from afar, lighting up the sky with pink light. As the debris flies up like fireworks, that threat has finally been completely eliminated. Just like the two other fools who dared to touch the protagonist's sister, their bodies lie sprawled on the ground, defeated, without a chance to react or show mercy. The protagonist looks around, carefully assessing everything that just happened. His gaze then shifts to his sister, still lying on the ground, sleeping. Exhausted and drained, he let the sword fall to the floor, having no strength left to hold it. Right after that, he knelt down as extreme fatigue began to take over his entire body. A few seconds later, his body began to react, feeling intense pain and exhaustion that was almost unbearable. Within moments, he completely collapsed, coughing uncontrollably. Feeling intense pain throughout his body, he thought ironically, blowing up 3 mana cores didn't seem serious when he was still a mercenary. However, he knew he couldn't stay there. He urgently needed to find a place to hide. Looking around, he noticed a door leading somewhere and quickly followed it. Kicking the door open, he saw that there were many corpses scattered on the floor. At that moment, he clearly remembered that in his previous life, others had been found alongside his injured sister, according to his memories. One of the corpses belonged to the son of an extremely important man named Discard. One of the corpses belonged to the son of a very important man named Discard. The young man on the ground was surely Discard's son, who had been eliminated along with his entire escort team. Observing closely, he understood that everything had been planned to incite a conflict between the two rival clans. He recalled the torn flags, the destroyed banners, and the environment was clearly staged to simulate a war scenario. He was fully aware that if discovered, it could cause unimaginable chaos in the kingdom. For that reason, he quickly drew something from his belt. Determined to erase all traces of the scene, he wasted no time igniting the entire old house. Preventing any evidence from being discovered, he placed his sister on his back. Determined to protect her, he began to move quickly out of there. What he didn't know was that he was being watched by someone lurking in the shadows, as mysterious as their appearance. That person vanished, leaving no trace behind. That individual had witnessed everything, and then reported the events directly to the one who had hired them. They had been harshly questioned because they couldn't even eliminate a child. This was considered extremely embarrassing, but they replied that they had sent their best man, and still failed. Kneeling in the middle of the room, they shouted in anger that it was all Gizlane Pertium's fault. The men gathered around that round table were shocked because they always regarded that boy as completely useless. One of the superiors believed that his subordinate was simply using that name, merely as an excuse, but the hooded man insisted that Pertium was very different. From the information and rumors he had received, he said he had observed everything unfold, and could recount every move the boy made while using his mana. He explained how the boy easily defeated the guards and the knights sent during that failed attack. He reported that even Frank, his well-trained man with the hat, had little chance against him. He detailed every step of the fight between Frankie and the young genius from the Pertium family. Finally, he recounted how the man exploded along with his mana, destroying the entire old house. He asserted that the boy seemed like a completely different person, clearly well-trained. Despite everything, he assured that he had carried out the events as agreed, and the territorial fight didn't matter. He requested another chance, and it was agreed that everyone wanted him to eliminate Pertium immediately. However, a man who had been silent until then spoke up, complaining that it was too noisy here. This man questioned what kind of opportunity the hooded figure was seeking. With such confidence, the hooded man angrily replied while looking at everyone. At the table, he promised to get rid of that troublesome boy once and for all. They asked him how he planned to do that, and he replied that it would be a duel. He said he had someone in mind to handle it quickly and efficiently. The table found the proposal interesting, so one of them asked exactly who this challenger would be. The hooded man replied that his name was Cain Loges, famous for his strength-based swordsmanship. He remarked that although young, Cain was highly respected for his muscular build and enormous strength. He revealed further that the muscular man and that troublesome boy were cousins, making the encounter potentially easier. After this revelation, the members at the table fell silent, contemplating the surprising proposal. One of them warned that if he failed again, the consequences would be much more severe than before. With a ruthless look, he made it clear that there would be no third chance for that incompetent subordinate. The man then vowed that this time he would not disappoint, and would complete his mission without any failures. Meanwhile, in the palace, in a training room, a very different scene was unfolding. The old knight Fergus, always attentive, had asked to enter and saw the young master training. He was completely shocked to realize that the boy was practicing mana and swordsmanship simultaneously. Observing closely, he recognized that this training exceeded any expectations he could have imagined before. The young master's progress was incredible. Achieving seemingly impossible advances in such a short time, still playing with the sword, the protagonist said contentedly that this was enough, then sensed the presence of the old knight and realized that he had something important to say. Fergus bowed respectfully, apologizing for interrupting the young master's training. The old man wanted to know how he had executed such an unusual and unexpected move during practice. The protagonist replied effortlessly, showing that he had created mana streams to firmly support his sword. The knight was completely shocked to see him controlling mana, as if it were an accessory. The young man then remembered Frank and realized that he had always done this in his past life. Now he was just using a single strand of mana, conserving energy and making the technique much more effective. Fergus remarked that even after years of mana training, he had never seen anything so complex and advanced. Thinking to himself, the old man reflected that the boy hadn't even known how to use mana until recently. The protagonist then asked why Fergus had come at this particular time. The old knight replied that he had come to thank him for protecting the lady recently. Surprised, the protagonist didn't understand the reason for the gratitude as he considered it merely his natural duty. A few days passed, and the festival had finally been postponed, something unavoidable after the recent events. This was natural. After all, a knight had attempted to kidnap the lady, which had caused a major uproar. The lady was now saddened because no one believed that her own brother had truly saved her. Sitting at the table, she gazed at her brother, clearly waiting for him to finally say something. Meanwhile, Belinda was very angry just recalling that Jamal and Phillips had attempted such a cruelty. Yet, the protagonist looked at the girl, feeling relieved that his sister had survived unharmed. Looking out the window, he thought he had prevented a war, but he knew they wouldn't give up easily. He realized he couldn't stop them alone forever. So, he needed to urgently build his own military strength while thinking. A servant entered the room, bringing dinner and temporarily interrupting his thoughts. As she served the dishes, the young man pondered that he might need to urgently engage in politics. Looking at his plate, he was surprised to see a very small portion. This immediately astonished him. He asked Belinda why they had started with dessert. She replied with a slight smile, saying he should have known. Fully aware of their family's current financial situation, which had completely gone bankrupt. While still complaining, they heard a piercing voice echoing from the window, attracting everyone's attention in the room. Outside, a plump man was shouting, demanding immediate compensation for the sudden cancellation of the festival. This man was accompanied by several angry farmers, all demanding compensation for their abruptly lost profits. They insisted that the nobles of that house needed to appear immediately to address the urgent issue. Amid the chaos, the protagonist approached the window to get a better view of what was happening. Melinda saw him approach and said she knew this would happen today. She explained that they were merchants relying on profits from the festival and had hoped to replicate previous earnings. The sudden cancellation of the festival just after one day had made everyone really angry. The main character had no idea that the district's economic situation was so dire. He realized that if they didn't act quickly, the farmers would become increasingly agitated and could turn violent. Through the window, he asked old Fergus where the soldiers who should calm the angry crowd were. Fergus informed him that there were no guards present that day. Most of the soldiers had been deployed to positions in the monster forest for reconstruction work. Looking at the map, he recalled that Pertium was always at war with the barbaric northerners. Additionally, they also faced monsters frequently emerging from the forest, attacking anyone they encountered, and to make matters worse, they had no money, no soldiers, and no resources to deal with such issues. He pulled Belinda aside, saying they needed to have a serious talk about the financial situation of the territory when he asked her if she was the one managing the money. Belinda just stared wide-eyed in despair upon hearing he wanted to use money to calm the merchants. She replied that there was nothing, which completely surprised the young man. He asked why they had no resources, and Belinda explained that the Count, her father, had recently cut off all allowances for children. Facing this, the main character realized that he was now a young man, bankrupt and nearly powerless. He tried to ask if he could borrow anything from her, but Belinda said she had nothing either. He sat on the windowsill, observing the desperate situation. Completely stranded, with no money, no soldiers, and no way out. Even with all his knowledge of the future, he couldn't solve this without any resources. While he was thinking, hurried footsteps echoed towards the young man. Someone had come to deliver news. One of the few remaining soldiers had arrived, immediately searching for the young man still seated. It was Ricardo, one of the commanders, who had come in a rush and was clearly worried. This made the young man quite curious. The main character wanted to know the reason for such urgency. Ricardo replied that there was a problem. He announced that Miss Kane was very eager to meet him, without providing many details about the reason. Upon hearing that name, the main character did not immediately associate it with anyone he knew. As they spoke, he noticed the commander's face was heavily bruised, covered in deep swellings. He seemed unable to defend himself after being repeatedly struck by an absurdly muscular arm. The relentless blows kept hitting his face and chest without any signs of fatigue. They were so powerful that even the commander's strong armor was completely crushed. Just a few minutes after Ricardo was thrown to the ground, the protagonist appeared at the door. Witnessing that moment, he saw his commander lying on the floor. One eye was completely swollen, and the other was nearly blind. The commander's condition was truly terrible, almost unrecognizable, struggling to utter a word. In that moment of desperation, he tried to catch the protagonist's attention. He was met with a fierce, furious gaze from the man responsible, looking down from above. Trying to intimidate the young man with his size, the towering figure was at least twice the height of the protagonist, if not more. Still, the blond boy just looked up. Unfazed by that towering wall, the muscular man remained vivid in his memory, and he remembered very clearly that he was the heir of the Logs district, with whom they had an alliance, his only friend, who was also his greatest enemy. And now they looked at each other in a silent struggle as the man descended the stairs. Approaching the commander lying down, who was still trembling uncontrollably, the young man had asked Soldier Ricardo what had happened inside that dark, mysterious cave. The soldier bowed his head and said they had responded to a report of commotion in the cave. He reported that upon arrival, they found the man surrounded by a security team and recognized him immediately. The man soon began to doubt whether the rumors about Pertium were true. Under pressure from the commander, he tried to explain in detail, but was grabbed by the throat and silenced forcefully. The man believed he was being deceived, tightening his grip as a punishment. The soldier continued to say that what remained was witnessed by his own eyes. Meanwhile, the giant had ordered that if the soldier spoke, at least tell the truth. Observing the swollen commander kneeling, he claimed he had only given him a few light blows. He asserted from a high position that nothing would happen. If the commander wasn't lying so blatantly, the protagonist was clenching his fists, staring at the giant with eyes full of memories. He truly had acted like that back then. Treating everyone like subordinates and demanding absolute obedience, the protagonist recalled the countless times he was pulled by the hair by that man. No one dared to oppose that man's selfish and dangerous actions, feared by the entire court. His behavior revealed a deep-seated inferiority complex manifested in impulsive and tyrannical actions. It was believed that this was why he was always criticized, but everyone turned a blind eye. Meanwhile, the giant observed the main character's expression and raised an eyebrow provocatively. In the past, he would have reacted thoughtlessly, but now it seems he's holding back. Holding himself back by a thread, in the past, someone had appeared with a proposal to eliminate Gizlane, and he listened without hesitation. As a man in a hood suggested that if he completed the task, his family would be supported, the man thought it would be easy to deal with that kid. But he knew the young guy had some skills too. Then the man in the hood advised him to provoke a conflict. To create an opportunity for a duel, he clarified that this would be a one-time chance. even for someone as unsophisticated as him. The man said he never thought about facing his cousin, but he eventually agreed with a smile, saying they would go to a suitable place. To provoke a situation leading to a challenge, looking at the man in the hood, he found the obsession with eliminating his cousin quite ridiculous, but still, he decided to comply, thinking it wouldn't hurt to act on the received proposal. He looked at the main character and asked what he was doing but was completely ignored. The man then sat down on a step and asked why he was standing still if he was there to provoke. His cousin mentioned the festival with a provocative smile and a mocking tone. Wide-eyed, he asked if the main character didn't remember the promise made at that festival. The blonde guy just looked to the side with his hands in his pockets and an indifferent expression. Raising an eyebrow, he asked if he was really bringing that up inappropriately. The fat guy wanted to imply that the main character always had women and drinks ready. To use, he remembered that he himself had promised this once to avoid getting beaten up. That never happened, however. The main character recalled the conversation with Belinda and the current lack of money, looking towards the man. An idea suddenly popped into his head, seeming brilliant and genius. His green eyes focused on the fat guy. Realizing that the guy had been right in front of him all along, that man was a lively and stable source of money. And now he planned to take advantage of that. This thought was interrupted when the man called out to him. In a threatening and impatient tone, the fat guy said he better do what he wanted quickly, and not bother him. Approaching, the main character asserted that he would be quick, and wouldn't waste time with unnecessary explanations. As he got closer, he asked if he didn't have a huge debt to pay off. Immediately, the man in the hood, hearing this, realized the direction of the conversation between the two, causing the relatives to feel strange. Sitting on the steps, the man looked up, wanting to know exactly what was being discussed. The protagonist reminded the guy that he always did everything with his own money. The man raised an eyebrow, stating that everything was done for true friendship, but the protagonist asserted that they were not friends, but master and disciple, demanding immediate payment, walking straight towards him. He threatened to beat him a bit if he didn't pay the debt right then. The hooded man observed silently, while the soldier beside witnessed the completely horrifying scene, trembling. The soldier thought that the young master had used dangerous words without considering the consequences. The man then slowly stood up, looking the protagonist up and down with a tense expression, but the protagonist kept his hands in his pockets, calm as ever. The fat guy noticed his confidence, stared at him, and said he was crazy. Believing the rumors, clenching his fists and preparing to attack, he shouted that he was just a parasite. Pushing the person away and swinging his hand back, he ordered him to go back to his place. Even when seeing the attack coming, the protagonist still didn't move. Standing still and alert, he dodged just in time, causing the opponent's attack to completely go to waste. Soldier Ricardo and the hooded man saw this, reacting with great surprise and confusion, while the fat guy became angry for being ignored. Feeling humiliated in front of everyone present, with agility, the protagonist dodged and initiated a counterattack. Taking advantage of the enemy's low defense, the punch to the stomach was so strong that the man widened his eyes and bent down. Not stopping there, the protagonist continued with a series of strikes. Crushing any retaliation attempts, unable to defend himself, the man raised his hands to cover his face, in a desperate attempt to protect himself, but the protagonist only intended to scare him. He didn't try to actually hurt him at that moment, but the large man bent down. Coughing and unable to catch his breath, the hooded figure quickly approached, asking if the young master was okay after those wild strikes. The protagonist, hands in pockets, simply requested his cousin to stop the tragedy and get up. The hooded figure ordered him to back off, saying he had already hurt the young master too much. Suddenly, everyone in the tavern recognized the protagonist's arrogance and began to watch him. Realizing that no words were spoken, with a subtle smile, he saw through their plan. Clearly a stage performance, the large man questioned the figure in the hood whether his act was convincing enough. At that moment, with a wide smile, the hooded figure replied that he had done well, and that his performance was perfect. He believed this was a great opportunity, and it was necessary to make every effort to make a good impression. Kane recalled the moment the hooded figure promised to help his family. If he cooperated, that was why he believed this was the perfect opportunity to defeat the Decane family. At that moment, the man removed a glove from his coat, stating that he would not accept such a disgraceful act. But before he could throw down his glove, a punch struck his face, signaling the start of a duel. The protagonist looked directly at him, officially challenging him in Kane's ledger for a fair duel. As the glove slipped from his face, the man widened his eyes, disappointed that the opportunity had passed. The protagonist continued to say that he had been publicly insulted. As the legal heir of Pertium, he also stated that Kane had injured a knight, deserving to uphold the ideals of Pertium. These words shocked the soldier, unable to believe the boldness of the young master in front of everyone, with his green eyes staring at him. He asked if he would not refuse the proposed challenge. The unexpected question shocked both Kane and the hooded figure. To leave them without an immediate reaction, Kane then laughed and said that his cousin was crazy. But now, there was nothing he could do about it. He placed his hand on his back, drawing his sword and stating that he would accept the duel with honor. He warned that the young man would regret it later. Once he lost his life under his blade, as he said this, he raised his sword in front of the protagonist. With a threatening gaze and determination, still staring at him, the protagonist called the soldier. Quickly responding to the young master's command, he requested him to bring all the merchants. Protesting in front of the castle at the location he wanted everyone to be present, as a true spectacle was about to unfold there when the festival was cancelled. The atmosphere had heated up to the point where tourists felt regret. Now everyone seemed to be burning inside for not being able to spend the money they had saved. Considering that the protagonist had thought it through, a situation that could grab everyone's attention, he created a makeshift arena and turned the merchants into paying spectators for his idea, encouraging them to bet on who they thought had the best chance of winning the match, all of whom were used to selling and consuming. Now, there would be a much greater entertainment beyond the tents that had been set up. There was even a promise of a truly spectacular battle. To place a bet, just line up and hand over the desired amount to the match organizers. Coins fell thickly to the ground. As the bettors chose between the young host and the visitor, the big man had planted his sword into the ground and announced that the anticipated match was about to begin. He clearly felt annoyed, believing it disrespectful to turn something sacred, like a match, into a commercial spectacle. Nonetheless, the man declared that before the fight, he needed to say something, or his sword would not be able to settle. The protagonist just listened, and did not respond to what he considered a direct insult to his honor. He recalled how the man in the hat and the big man had watched him, and sensed their hidden intentions, now that he had gathered enough people around. The match could finally begin as planned. However, the figure in the hat asked him to wait a little longer. Before starting the match, he expressed doubts that the betting system was conducted honestly or fairly. The bettors felt confused, unsure of the man's intentions. At that moment, the betting overseer admitted that it was true. No one had bet on the side of the young host. The protagonist turned around slightly and stared at the one handling the bets. According to him, he had bet on the young host because he didn't believe he could win in that tough battle, mocking the situation. The protagonist's cousin commented that even the gamblers had lost faith in him. The big man then suggested changing the type of bet, focusing on the duration of the match instead of the winner. At that moment, another person stepped into the scene and reinforced the idea of betting on the time of the battle. The commander placed a bag of money and bet the entire amount on the young host Gizlane. Hearing this, the protagonist smiled modestly, not showing any significant reaction to the supportive gesture. Not long after, another sum was added, tossed forcefully onto the amount already placed by the confident commander. Helena and Belinda decided to place their bets firmly on their brother and the master. Loved by both, this attitude surprised both the commander and the soldier Ricardo, who wouldn't expect such emotional involvement. It also caught the protagonist's attention. When he never imagined seeing his sister clearly standing by his side, many residents in the district were very curious to see Helena publicly supporting her brother in such a risky situation. The young girl angrily questioned the bookmaker. "Is that amount really enough?" In response, the man in the hood changed his expression. Noticing that many were showing real confidence in the protagonist, even young Master Kane displayed a hint of disdain. Now seemingly even more annoyed by the situation, the protagonist declared that because he was older, he thought it was unfair to start the duel with an advantage, gripping his sword tightly, gripping the hilt of the sword with strength and the sheath with an unusual lightness. With precise movements, he sliced through the air with the sword and repositioned it at rest. He stared directly at his opponent and invited him to quietly make the first move in the duel. The opponent maintained a disdainful expression but chose to remain silent in the face of the direct provocation. The cousin remarked that it was too late to pretend to act like a responsible brother. Without hesitation, he charged at the protagonist with a brutal head-on attack. Aiming to strike him from above, the blow was barely blocked by the protagonist, the one who raised the sword at the last moment, while Kane yelled that it was too late for regrets. The protagonist maintained a focused expression despite the strength of the blow. The protagonist resisted and soon began dodging rapidly to survive, while Kane attacked with all his might, trying to hit him in a devastating and decisive manner. The protagonist's agility was not enough, and many thought he was just afraid to fight. The protagonist's defensive style had made the opponent more confident and careless. In reality, it was all part of a plan to make the opponent comfortable in his safe zone. The bettors watched in absolute silence. Not realizing the real reason behind the passive stance, the man in the hood concluded that Lane had fallen into a trap. By agreeing to fight in that armed duel, it was clear the opponent was only focused on attacking, and leaving no chance for direct counterattacks. In this way, he would tire himself out, and Kane would just wait for the right moment to end the fight. That's how he conducted his duels, always waiting until his opponent was too exhausted. Even the giant admitted that Kane was better than he imagined. With skills above average, he also realized that the opponent could dodge easier than he had predicted. Suddenly, Kane held his sword in an inverted grip. Using the hook on the hilt as an advantage with this move, he pulled the protagonist and threw him high up. With extreme brutality, as the protagonist soared through the air, Kane prepared to unleash the final blow without hesitation. The crowd watched in shock. Believing the young master wouldn't have a chance to react, even the man in the hood smiled, confident that the fight would end immediately as he fell from above. The protagonist heard the shouts calling for his brutal end, but that was the moment he had been waiting for. To truly begin his fight, he initially thought about taking it easy, but he changed his mind after being thrown brutally. Filled with rage, he charged at his opponent, declaring that he had surpassed all limits. In an instant, he faced his enemy. Surprising with his speed, Cain didn't expect such a sudden approach, and immediately tried to attack the protagonist, but the protagonist deftly dodged, evading the counterattack with a move almost impossible to follow. Everything happened too fast. So much so that even the giant couldn't react to stop the strike. The man in the hood realized the protagonist was using mana to stabilize his fall and regain control. Now only Lane was determined to eliminate his opponent accurately. Without hesitating for a second, he stood behind his opponent. He claimed that his swordsmanship was ignorant and lacking technique. He wanted to open their eyes, and with the sword raised high, he prepared for the lesson, and Cain looked at him with hatred. Questioning how his enemy could reveal the truth in such a way, Gizlane moved skillfully with perfect steps, attacking his opponent where he least expected it. As the giant tried to counterattack, the protagonist simply spun around and took a dominating position, jumping over his opponent, and prepared to deliver the final blow with the highest efficiency and accuracy. The surprising move enraged Cain. He screamed in frustration for not being able to hit him even once. Gizlane was clearly more agile, and his blocking skills were more refined than ever. He even stepped on Cain's sword to dodge another strike and stepped back with determination, standing in the perfect position, and prepared for the decisive strike against his enemy. He was so fast that Cain didn't even realize the exact moment he lost the battle. The young blonde guy with blue eyes had done everything, without showing a hint of regret for winning. Now the giant lay there heavily injured. Not realizing when he had been struck with such precision, all the witnesses of the fight were in a state of shock, and the initial excitement completely vanished from the air, though they acknowledged the young master's progress. No one could believe he had actually won. Not even Belinda could believe it. But Helena, with her arms crossed, seemed to know what was about to happen. Just like the commander has seen him fight against monsters, he has no doubt about his abilities. However, the hooded figure was very angry with the results as Cain was once again severely injured, nearly fatally, thinking that his cousin hadn't taken him down just because he didn't want to. Obsessed with hatred, he refused to accept that this kid could have progressed this much. In such a short period, he began to stare at the protagonist, who stood tall with his sword firmly in hand. The protagonist noticed the gaze and responded, indicating he was ready to continue fighting if necessary. Then, with disdain, he tossed the sword aside and declared he would only fight barehanded. Still, that gesture wasn't enough to calm the fury of the large, offended man as he looked at his cousin. The protagonist declared that it would be a great way to educate him through force. He honestly believed there was no better way to teach them. With a proper beating, he raised one eyebrow. The large man wanted to know if that kid really dared to try to educate him. Rolling up his sleeves, the young man concluded he was right, and that's exactly what he would do barehanded. For that reason, he decided to raise the stakes, doubling the initial bet because he was sure he would win for all those who had bet against him. Doubts arose since this was supposed to be just a match. Even the hooded figure found the protagonist's behavior strange. He was sweating and found it odd that the boy wanted to face him barehanded. But thinking that maybe not all was lost, the betting manager yelled that everyone should take advantage and place new bets again. All eyes turned to the arena, and most chose to bet against the protagonist. However, those who had bet on him from the start remained steadfast, watching Cain's stance, finding it ridiculous that this skinny kid wanted to trade blows with a giant like him. In case it was necessary, he gripped the sword tightly and took off his jacket, tossing it aside with the sword in hand. He announced that he would continue to use it even though the protagonist had done nothing to stop him. Belinda muttered that young Master Cain was foolish to insist on using a sword. While the other was only using bare hands, the large man didn't care, because he viewed this as a sword fight and would remain loyal to his choice. The protagonist kept his promise, stating that he needed to teach him a lesson in another way. With his fists clenched and in a boxing stance, the protagonist began to dodge, always looking for an opening, while the large man couldn't land a single hit. Growing increasingly frustrated with his opponent's agility, the protagonist's footwork became faster and more consistent. This made Cain's massive body look slow and confused against the attacks. As soon as the protagonist saw an opening in his opponent's defense, he charged in and quickly delivered a strike. He then unleashed a flurry of punches, determined to teach that arrogant man a serious lesson. Now, Cain was in serious trouble as he continuously took hits. At one point, a punch to his chin was so strong it made his head tilt to the side. Without realizing it, Cain had dropped to one knee. Dazed from the impact, he looked down to realize he had failed, both with his sword and his own fists. What ran through his mind was how someone so weak could execute such precise moves. Meanwhile, everyone watching the fight noticed that young Master Gizlane was on a whole different level. The protagonist looked at the man who had fallen and told him to get up because the lesson of the day had just begun. Now, The opponent was filled with rage and determined to eliminate the one who had embarrassed him. With the sword in hand, he charged at the protagonist, who stood firm with his fists clenched. A new game of movement began, with the protagonist easily dodging the attacks. The huge man couldn't understand what was happening, as the blonde man had barely had the courage to face him before. But now, he seemed strong enough to make his opponent feel fear. This made the protagonist grip his opponent's arm tightly and prepare to move forward, as the opponent was completely immobilized. The protagonist began a series of knee strikes while enduring punches, with Kane trying to hold his ground. Thinking that he needed to ensure success for his family, however, his hesitation and low defense had prevented him from regaining control of the fight, resulting in a flurry of punches and kicks. Knees and a series of lessons were applied, and after a while, Kane's body was swollen with bruises all over. The protagonist grabbed his hair, looked into his face, and said he felt pity for his father. The cousin tried to whisper something, but the words couldn't come out clearly. Gizlane declared that the Count had helped the dying land only because of his friendship with Kane's father. It's a shame that the son has such a narrow-minded and different perspective when looking at the bruised face of the one who always controlled. The protagonist recalled the past, remembering when the Count had continuously sent help to Pertium. On one of those occasions, the son had wondered why he insisted on helping a cursed place. At that time, the Count had responded with silence until one day he said it was just because they were friends. Now Kane heard similar words from the mouth of the boy who had just defeated him. Even with his bruised face, he was still enduring the final punches of the last lesson. He just closed his eyes and accepted the punishment without reacting. The enemy did nothing but ask if he had finally learned his lesson. The question made Kane open his eyes and see the outstretched hand of the protagonist. The hand was still there, but the young man only bowed his head, too embarrassed to accept it. This gesture was enough for everyone around to understand that he had lost. It left the bettors confused by the surprising outcome of the match. Some were angry, while others were scared. Covering their mouths in shock, among those impressed was a person wearing a hood. In contrast, those who bet on Gizlane were celebrating with cheers, having made a lot of money. The young girl Helena was also beaming. She had bet on her brother and was now wealthy. Furious, the hooded figure marched toward the loser with big, angry strides. He shouted at Kane, calling him a fool for admitting defeat, while the massive man struggled to stand up. Turning away, he demanded that he leave because he no longer wanted to be involved in this. The hooded figure raised a hand to his face, realizing he had gotten himself into another mess due to his failure. The protagonist was aware of everything, capturing the hooded figure's attention. Asking what he would do this time, he smiled and declared that the man should fulfill his duty. This made the other man turn around immediately, with the hooded figure asking what he was talking about. In a firm voice, Gizlane shouted that this man had volunteered to cover all the food and drinks for the night, complicating the situation for the hooded figure. A person who could not deny that without getting himself into more trouble in a desperate act. He shouted that he disagreed with that and refused. Gizlane placed a hand on his shoulder, saying that this was the price to pay for losing. The hooded figure fell silent before the implied threat. With more certainty in his grip, Justine demanded that he not forget to add the extra amount. With a threatening aura, he warned that if the man ran away, he already knew what would happen. That presence clearly showed he was not joking and would not hesitate if necessary. So, the protagonist left the arena with both adversaries properly defeated. The castle remained in a celebratory atmosphere for a while, and the next day, the protagonist opened a chest in his room. Looking at the gold coins, he wondered if he could hire a small group of mercenaries. With that amount, he now needed to act wisely as he needed to accumulate more money to execute his plan. Unbeknownst to him, his sister and the maid Belinda had entered the room. I asked both of them what they wanted there, looking into their determined eyes. My sister cleverly asked where I planned to invest money. I noticed her interest and asked if she wanted to share, but she replied that she was just curious. Belinda said it was clear where I should spend my money. She mentioned that Miss Amelia's birthday was coming up and thought all of this was for her. Now my sister thinks I've done all these things for my fiancée Amelia. Having a fiancé is still something new for me, since I had never gone through that past with a serious expression. He asked her if I had a fiancé at that time. Linda replied that I didn't need to be embarrassed, because they were talking about Amelia from Highford, upon hearing the name of the woman and the county associated with her. His gaze changed immediately. Suddenly, he remembered the young woman resembling a silent spider. Weaving her web, she was considered noble among nobles, the perfect apple desired by all generations of power. In the future, she would be known as the Northern Witch, one of the main traitors who would ruin the kingdom. Now that he knew about the future, he tried to put on a gentle smile because he had a plan. Belinda asked when his father would return, and the maid replied that it might be in a week. He thought that this time might be enough to safely execute his plan. He said he would go to Rayford County, and Belinda advised him to calm down since it wasn't even her birthday yet. However, he affirmed that his visit wouldn't come from goodwill, but to take money from that young girl. Amelia was a girl with bright brown hair, pale skin, and always dressed neatly, though she had a strangely intimidating appearance. She often performed many charitable acts in her territory at that time. She was in a village providing comfortable shoes for an orphan child in need. The girl sincerely thanked her. While Amelia said that if anyone should go barefoot, it should be her. She requested the soldiers to provide food and shelter for the girl, and they quickly began to take turns. They brought boxes and many boxes of relief goods for the many residents of the forgotten village. On her way back, she walked home barefoot and then sat in the garden next to a white cat. Knight Bernard, escorting her, knelt to wash the young girl's feet while she petted the animal. Meanwhile, she gently remarked that her father always demanded absolute obedience from the locals, but she said, people tended to follow those who provided shelter and food in difficult times. The knight replied that with such actions, she had won the hearts of the people. The young girl looked at the man with a cold gaze, and seemed dissatisfied with that, then placed her foot on him. With her feet on his face, she asked what happened during the duel. Bernard apologized, saying he preferred to avoid attracting attention, because it wasn't the right time yet while caressing the young girl's legs. He swore that his sword was only for her, and she always wanted to confirm that. Saying that she had invested too much in that loyal knight, she held his chin and looked deeply. Deep into his eyes, she revealed her most wicked side, telling him she forbade weakness, because she wouldn't tolerate cowardice in those around her. Then they began discussing the merchants, and Bernard mentioned that they were recovering funds from the accused sources he had recruited. The soldiers who had fled from Pertium now had a well-trained armed force. The young girl ordered the organization's front to remain intact. As if it were just a simple trade association, their conversation was interrupted when a servant arrived. Informing them that someone was requesting to see her, Bernard went to meet the steward to prevent the meeting, saying that the young lady would not meet anyone, but upon learning it was her fiancé, the young girl felt strange and decided to accept him. The steward went pale when announcing the visit, and feared, repeating exactly what he had heard when informing her that the young man knew about the merchants. Both the young girl and Bernard turned visibly pale in the hallway. The reception room door seemed to be closed. With the young girl sitting while holding her cat, the protagonist entered holding a simple flower. Politely greeting Miss Amelia with a shy smile, she didn't seem interested in chatting. Even the cat seemed to react with hostility. She said it wasn't necessary for someone to appear unannounced, and still demanded attention too soon. The young man explained that his birthday was coming, and so he brought a simple gift. He placed the flower on the table, saying he took it from a nearby merchant association. The fragrance of the flower was gentle and enticing, but he mentioned the name of the art team association. Upon hearing that name, the young girl immediately realized the true intentions of the guest. Annoyed, she stood up, saying she didn't understand what he was trying to imply with such a provocation. She said she had already received the gift, and he could leave without causing any more trouble. However, the young man requested her to sit down, because he hadn't finished his financial proposal yet. Amelia's eyes widened, as she felt intense pressure from him that made her uncomfortable. The power he emanated was so great that the teacup on the table began to tremble. In silence, she glanced sideways in surprise, remembering that he used to tremble even in front of women. Seeing that she had caught his attention, he declared that he wanted 10,000 gold coins as a loan. The young girl raised an eyebrow, finding his attitude extremely rude and bold in this situation. She quickly lost control, yelling at him, asking if he thought she should treat this as a debt from a count. The protagonist replied that her father had nothing to do with this since she intended to marry him. Amelia then shot him the worst look possible, the kind reserved for bold traitors. But he continued and decided to reveal everything. He knew about the secret association with the throne when mentioning her hidden involvement. The white cat went berserk and jumped off the armchair in a fit of rage, even though the cat was agitated. The young man remained steadfast, just observing and waiting for her final reaction. Amelia ordered him never to repeat such words even as a joke and stood up in anger. The young man replied that he could stay silent, but that would come at a cost and depend on the amount. She scoffed and declared that she would never give him what he was asking for. Then she called for Bernard, who entered the room with steady steps and a dignified demeanor. He greeted Miss Gizlane, saying it had been a long time since their last meeting. The protagonist shot him a cold glance because he knew that man was her favorite swordsman. He also knew that he had the potential to become the best swordsman in the north. He then warned that if he died here, a war would surely break out without warning. But the young girl raised her hand and said that everyone would believe a fugitive had tried to rob her house, touching the spider-shaped decoration. She had ordered the knight to immediately eliminate that nuisance, and Bernard drew his sword. Gripping the sword hilt with the determination of a seasoned warrior, the protagonist watched intently, because they had chosen the hardest way to resolve this if that was the path they intended to take. He would not hesitate to respond in kind, and when the knight drew his sword, the protagonist also stood up and began to grasp her sword, while Bernard only looked seriously at the lady, who seemed ready for anything. The protagonist then realized something was about to happen, as if an omen was warning him without needing to look toward the danger. He had known what the next move would be the moment a shadow appeared behind him with clarity. His hostile intent was made clear when the attacker stabbed the sofa, where he had been sitting just moments before. The protagonist quickly dove out of the way of the furniture, allows the punch to only hit the couch in a swift and precise motion. He punched the man's stomach with all his might, the impact so strong that the man flew through the window, taking the sofa with him and falling outside. The speed and precision of the strike left both the young girl and her knight visibly impressed as the protagonist turned to look at the girl and remarked that pretending to be polite before a treacherous attack is strange. Stating that he was ready to face her knight, he declared that the hospitality of this place was quite mediocre. The swords began to intertwine with swift strikes and precise blocks in a deadly dance of steel. Despite the protagonist's rapid movements, Knight Bernard managed to block the attack. Staring at Bernard, young Gizlane said that this district seems to not understand the true meaning of a knight still holding a sword after blocking. Bernard retorted that the young man had been rude from the start, then pressed his hand against the protagonist's blade, and stated that there was no need to maintain decorum anymore. Attempting a powerful strike, Bernard was surprised by Gizlane's agility, who easily dodged the strike by perfectly moving his feet. The protagonist attacked Bernard, who was advancing aggressively. The sudden strike caught Bernard off guard, but he didn't see it as a reason to panic. He then stepped back a few paces to get a clearer analysis of the situation and his opponent. Bernard observed young Gizlane more closely and realized he was nothing like the rumors. His steady stance and quick reactions showed he wasn't the useless dog many had said. The young girl crossed her arms and asked if her knight was having trouble with a boy who was just an ordinary person. Then, in a sad and disdainful tone, she said, "Perhaps it would be better to dispose of the young man and present his head to that." Bernard felt more pressure and realized he couldn't afford to lose this sword fight, tightening his grip on the hilt. He promised his lady that he wouldn't disappoint her under any circumstances, then pointed his sword at Gizlane and challenged him to face him with everything he had. Gizlane, however, was well aware of his position and warned the knight not to make the mistake of ordering him. Bernard then said that he was simply doing the boy a favor, and if he didn't want to, that was fine too. He prepared to attack, stating that he would act only as he saw fit without any formalities. In the next attack, Gizlane barely had time to dodge as the movement was astonishingly fast. The cut on his face made it clear that Bernard was very quick and would require him to be even faster. Bernard maintained a serious expression and conveyed the intention that he would do whatever it takes to win. The real showdown has begun with a series of intense attacks, defenses, and counterattacks. Amelia, observing, wonders how someone called useless could possibly fight on par with her best knight. Moreover, it seems Gizlane has a slight edge. Even if just a little, he continuously dodges and defends, and maintains a perfect position while attacking accurately. Bernard, on the other hand, shows no sign of weakness or hesitation, holding firm to his technique. The young woman watches in silence as the duel intensifies. At any moment, if either makes a mistake, everything will end instantly. Once again, Bernard holds the sword as before. The protagonist counters with a spin, but this time alters his movements slightly. He then warns Bernard not to fall for the same trick twice in a row. With that, he executes an even more surprising foot maneuver, agile and creative. However, by repeating part of the previous pattern, he realizes Bernard has predicted it. With a slight smirk, Bernard says that trick won't work anymore. And then, for the first time, Gizlane is thrown to the ground. Landing on his back, he feels he's pushed too far and needs to be more careful. Bernard won't miss such a clear opportunity and prepares for the finishing blow. However, the protagonist is skilled not only with the sword but also with his body thanks to his refined technique. He performs a somersault jump, spinning in midair. With that move, he understands that Bernard is using mana to enhance his speed and accuracy. Meanwhile, Bernard approaches him with both swords firmly in hand after knocking Gizlane's sword away. He asks if he has ever trained with savages, saying that style of fencing could be useful on the battlefield, but not against a knight like him. He believes this will be the end for the young man Gizlane, and that he will have the honor of finishing him since he stepped into that territory. The protagonist knows this confrontation will be tough, as Bernard's attacks are aimed precisely at his head, requiring increasingly quick reflexes. At that moment, he realizes this isn't an enemy he can face right now. Not in the usual way. Still, he is ready. Gizlane warns Bernard that he has no time to waste, then uses a thin strand of mana to pull his sword back. As Bernard advances, the knight quickly realizes the almost invisible thread extending to the fallen sword. The magical thread, as thin as a hair, stands out for its precision and refined skill. The sword then strikes Bernard from behind with the hilt, causing his eyes to widen in surprise and anger. The gap created, allowing the protagonist to counter with knees and quick, calculated strikes. However, Bernard manages to dodge the blows in time, proving his experience in real combat. The young girl Amelia cries out desperately for Bernard, unable to believe he could lose. Meanwhile, the protagonist leaps up with his sword in hand, ready for an aerial attack. The blade descends rapidly from above, forcing Bernard to raise his sword at the last moment to block it. If he hesitates, the strike will hit his neck, ending the battle, and the impact now grows larger. Revealing the unique skills of both warriors, the protagonist steps back once more. Realizing he needs to better analyze his opponent's action patterns, he knows that if he prolongs this any further, he will need to use his final strategy. He looks at Amelia and asks her to leave. Because he can no longer ensure her safety, she hesitates but quickly realizes the battle is beyond her capabilities, and that intervening would be useless. He focuses his gaze on Gizlane. Bernard declares that from this moment on, he will fight with everything he has. The protagonist smiles and says that's exactly how he likes to fight, without holding back or hesitation. He adds that it has been a long time since he faced someone as strong and worthy as the young girl, Amelia. Quickly obeying the knight's command, she left the dark and suffocating room. She ran through the hallways, cradling the soft-furred white cat in her arms. As he rushed ahead, he reminded himself that the Lord shouldn't treat her with such humiliation. He also wondered in his mind who had leaked the guild's secret information to the boy during his escape. He began to believe that the rumor about them defeating some orcs might be true. However, seeing him for the first time, I found it strange that someone so useless could achieve such accomplishments, hiding behind a large column. He wondered about the presence of the guards who were supposed to protect his back. However, he fell into complete despair upon seeing all the soldiers lying on the ground. There was no sign of life. In the center of the scene, a shadowy figure calmly observed. She radiated her presence with a disturbing calmness. It was clearly a woman with white hair and pink strands, her cold gaze reflecting undeniable chill. She spoke sharply that it had been a long time since she served that spoiled young lady. Amelia was bewildered to realize her old maid was now dressed in typical mercenary attire. She tried to ask what was happening but was quickly silenced by a powerful and commanding gesture. Belinda approached without Amelia recognizing her, placing a sharp object near her pale neck. The young lady felt out of place as she had fled precisely to save her life from threats like this. Shortly after, Belinda roughly pulled the trapped spider from the young lady's mouth. She commented that it was strange since she had seen the exact same spider at the engagement ceremony. She also revealed that she had heard Amelia's brothers mocking her for being surrounded by spiders. Since childhood, while holding the spider with one hand, she said it might be an unresolved trauma. Without hesitation, she threw the insect to the ground, stating that it definitely didn't match her appearance. With a strong stomp, she completely crushed the spider, leaving only a black stain on the stones. After eliminating the creature, Belinda looked at the young lady. She asked if she would be willing to cooperate while Amelia's knight was still stuck in battle. And unable to provide immediate assistance, the atmosphere around them felt heavier. The main character could clearly sense the intensity radiating from the fight. The opposing knight swung his sword with extreme precision, keeping his gaze fixed on his direct opponent. Even so, the main character is determined to inform the knight that he is on the same level as the young man. The noble lady, he also mentions that his opponent is speaking only things that a mediocre mercenary would dare to say, and in response, the young noble firmly retorts, affirming that he is also of noble birth and deserving of respect. He declares that a mediocre protective knight has no right to speak to him like that. Bernard, the knight, refusing to listen to the taunts from that reckless noble, who knows no limits, he declares that the boy cannot tarnish the sacred reputation of true nobility in the kingdom. At that moment, the main character notices Bernard's movements becoming rougher and more aggressive. However, having once been the King of Mercenaries in a past life, he knows how to defend himself perfectly. Despite this, he is now forced to react faster and calculate each of his moves precisely. Each sword strike from the enemy is dangerously close to vital areas, raising the tension of the battle. The margin for error is zero, and the main character knows he cannot be at a disadvantage for even a second. He limits himself to blocking and dodging, maintaining a defensive stance while looking for a decisive opportunity. He decides that this situation cannot continue and resolves to abandon defense. To counterattack with all his strength, he charges aggressively at Bernard, attacking, even though he doesn't know if he will cause significant damage. The knight also remains vigilant, throwing punches with calmness and an unshakable expression. However, Bernard notices that his sword is under increasing pressure. From the continuous attacks of the opponent, from the determined look on the young man's face, the battle truly seems close to an unavoidable and irreversible end. Yet Bernard arrogantly asks if the main character has any last words before defeat comes. The main character responds with silence, as he has clearly envisioned the end of this fierce battle. The decisive blow comes unexpectedly and Bernard is struck while off guard. With no time to react, the main character uses his back leg and shoulder to change the angle of the sword. Thus, the blow that should have been fatal becomes just a scratch on the shoulder. To Bernard's dismay, he understands he can no longer underestimate the young man. For any mistake would be a fatal one. The intensity of the battle increases, and now both are fully engaged in an evenly matched and fierce duel. The knight also employs techniques with his legs and asks if he should show what true strength is. After delivering a kick that sends the main character flying, he smirks provocatively even while lying on the ground. The young nobleman keeps a smile while watching the man as a great opponent for entertainment. Carefully observing the exchange of blows, he admires the reach and effectiveness of Bernard's attack. He realizes that any attempt to change the course of the match is being thwarted with impressive speed and accuracy. In the clash of swords, the impact seems to bind them together. It's the mana control the knight employs. The protagonist understands that with his current mana, he won't be able to overcome the brute strength of the enemy. He grips the hilt of his sword tightly, saddened by the decision he will have to make at that critical moment. However, there is one thing that Bernard has yet to realize, and that will change the tide of the tense battle. The protagonist focuses, expanding his mana core, and then opens a third core in succession. With that, he unleashes all the energy he has stored and activates a cultivation technique considered extremely rare and powerful. He decides to apply this extra power against Bernard, holding his sword tightly while his opponent uses only one hand. The attacks become more intense, and with a fierce strike, he succeeds in knocking the sword out of his opponent's hand. Bernard, surprised to see his weapon taken by someone who until then seemed to be the weaker one. He stares at the young man, not understanding how he could maintain such explosive mana throughout the match. The tip of the protagonist's sword now poses a danger close to the forehead of the defeated knight. At that moment, he declares the match over. While Belinda still keeps Emilia under control, the young lady is forced to witness the defeat of her knight. Declaring that she will give the protagonist the requested amount, however, the young man says she should understand and cooperate from the start of the conversation. After hearing what he needed, he slowly withdraws the sword from Bernard's forehead, officially ending the battle. Belinda again comments that he shouldn't speak harshly to his future noble fiancée, stepping closer to Emilia with the sword resting on his shoulder. The protagonist says he has some bad news to announce after all his efforts in that match. He admits that he is exhausted and now wants double the agreed amount. The scene the protagonist leaves behind is a massive devastation caused with terrifying precision and brutality. Frustrated, the young lady throws a vase to the ground while her cat scurries away. She is talking to her knight, expressing the anger of both for being humiliated disgracefully. Bernard is very upset for not meeting the standards that the young lady expected. At that moment, the woman asks the knight if the young lady has really changed that much since their last meeting. Facing her doubt, the knight asks if she wants to report that to Duke Delphine. The woman went crazy and slapped the knight's face. The guard crossed her arms behind her back, grabbing his collar. She said that if he said anything, both of them would suffer greatly. She revealed that she had allied with the Duke due to a non-disclosure agreement. She said that if that harasser discovered the secret of the trade association, he would also learn about the deal, and for that reason, they had to act immediately. Before they completely lost control of the situation, the knight agreed with the assessment. Knowing that the risks were greater than they appeared, she then wanted to know the current state of Lord Gizlane's body. At that moment, the knight replied that he had a deep wound in his left shoulder, and he had consumed a lot of mana. He believed it would be dangerous if anything happened, especially if it was caused by the knights from that land. The woman handled the items on her desk. She said she had just come up with a new strategy and looked at the knight. She said that was why they had trained those specific people. The knight was surprised by the young woman's strategy. It seemed to have been thought out quickly and accurately. She wanted to use the feral cats, an elite group trained secretly for a long time. They were war orphans without families or status, formed only by the best and most flexible experts. The young lady moved a piece with a green flag on the chessboard. Calling them the feral cat dealers, she ordered the knight to gather all of them in that area, only requiring qualified individuals. The knight understood that using mana was essential. For moments like this, especially in a mountain area between the forest, considered the only path between two separate territories, the knight knew exactly the ideal location to carry out an effective ambush against any hostile attack. The woman was sure the protagonist would come to eliminate her for all the humiliation she had endured before. After leaving by carriage, the protagonist tended to his wounds. Using the money he had taken from her, he thought of the young woman's name, remembering it was Emilia with a hint of disdain inside the carriage. Old man Fergus asked the young sir if he really felt okay, pointing to his injured arm. He said it wasn't deep and he was managing the situation well. Looking back, he thought the 20,000 he had given Emilia covered all necessary expenses. He really wanted to get rid of her, but he knew a war would break out if he did so. He also knew that the savages caused instability in the territory, so he shouldn't provoke any more chaos as he donned his cloak. He thought that just knowing about the trade association was enough. This time, he would make good use of the girl and the information obtained through her without hesitation. Meanwhile, he looked ahead and noticed that his maid Belinda was silent. Just observing, she suddenly asked the Lord if everything was going according to plan. She said she followed his orders, accompanying the guards after hearing sounds from inside the room. However, the young man had assigned Fergus to handle that, not Belinda, to avoid getting involved. Though everything seemed fine, a sharp pain suddenly hit the protagonist's body. He bent over, feeling a severe pain in his head and chest, clearly worrying Fergus. Looking at his hand, he realized it was a side effect of using the third core. While thinking about how to boost his mana, Belinda suddenly grabbed his hand. With strange movements, the young man wondered what she was trying to do with that. She said the mana flow in his body was terrible, so she took a needle with surgical precision. She began to prick small injections into the Lord's hand, quickly adjusting his energy. All the pain seemed to vanish, making him look stable and relieved. For a moment, he felt like he was suffocating, as if the air was stuck. But then he was able to take a deep breath, looking back at himself. He noticed the chaotic mana flow had somewhat cleared up. Now he looked at Belinda and realized she was not just a simple maid. When she appeared, he knew it was his mother who had brought Belinda to the castle. But there were still many mysteries about her that he couldn't understand. How could a maid have such refined skills and such effective techniques? He thought it would be great to have someone as strong as that among his allies, with the enemies coming soon. The carriage moved steadily along the shaded road under the trees. Linda looked at the young master and declared that she would always help him because she completely trusted him. She asked why he had taken so much gold from Lady Amelia, questioning that strange decision. She and Fergus were shocked when the protagonist revealed that he just needed the money, and she was rich. Both could hardly believe that he did it entirely out of financial necessity. At that moment, as the carriage continued, Belinda became angry because he had broken off the engagement just for money, yet he looked at her firmly and asked if she still trusted him. Despite her anger, Belinda replied that she trusted him but wanted to know what he would do with the gold. He became serious for a moment and explained that everything was related to the monster forest. He told her that he intended to be the pioneer in that dangerous and almost unexplored place. He tells her that he intends to be the pioneer in that dangerous and nearly unexplored place. The old Fergus tries to convince him to reconsider, but the young man recalls something that was requested before they entered the castle. Upon hearing this, Fergus's eyes widen and he begins to sweat. Visibly shaken by that memory, he hesitates for a few seconds before responding. As if weighing the right choice of words, he finally says that the young man had asked him to search for something specific in a hidden place. The protagonist declared that as long as he was alive, he wouldn't have trouble reaching that mysterious location. Although everyone thought they were going back, he asked Belinda if she thought Amelia would find a way to take revenge. Even proud of his strength, the young man warned that he intended to use her in other strategic actions. He stated that he needed a vanguard team and they were pursuing that right now. Soon, the carriage stopped in front of a humble house and everyone carefully got off. At night, Ricardo approached and knocked on the old wooden door of the house. After a few seconds, someone slowly opened the door, revealing a tall man with an unusual appearance. His thick eyebrows nearly obscured his eyes. Hidden under the weight of his hair, he asked them seriously who they were and what they wanted. In a deep voice, everyone was stunned by his appearance, seeing the man as intimidating and hostile. Seeing him for the first time, Belinda whispered to the protagonist, believing that the man was no longer in a condition to fight. The man only looked at them with a stern face, bothered by the whispers of the noble woman. Realizing they were nobles, the man attempted to lock the door and asked them to leave. However, the protagonist called out to him, addressing him as the former captain of the Ratatosk Mercenaries. Hearing his real name, Gillian, the man widened his eyes and glanced at the young lord. The young lord extended his hand towards him, saying it was nice to see him again after so long. The old knight Fergus, upon hearing the name of the Ratatosk mercenary, was immediately extremely impressed. That group was famous for their bravery. Any knight, including foreigners, was well aware of their reputation. The captain of that famous group was Gillian, who was the man quietly observing the protagonist, still holding out his hand, clearly expecting a respectful greeting. However, from inside that simple house, a surprise weapon flew quickly towards them. But thanks to the protagonist's agility, the weapon only tore his cloak without inflicting any injuries from that extremely hostile act. The three companions of the protagonist were completely shocked and tense. However, the man in the house also seemed surprised and quickly raised his hand to greet. But at that precise moment, both Fergus and Ricardo had drawn their swords, ready for battle. The man stared at the protagonist, who had directly asked the reason for their unexpected visit. Immediately, Belinda, the loyal servant, had drawn a dagger and stood in front of the protagonist to protect him. She firmly insists that the protagonist step back, stand behind her, and keep a distance from that dangerous man. However, the protagonist knows exactly what to say and responds that they are seeking eternal punishment. In response to that precise answer, the man has a clear light in his eyes. Realizing that those words are true, he carefully observes the protagonist, revealing that he knows how to cure the mysterious illness tormenting his daughter. He then asks firmly if this information will truly concern him. The protagonist is fully aware of the symptoms: high fever, persistent cough, red spots blooming like petals. Additionally, the image of the girl writhing in pain reminds him of a tortured prisoner, the origin of that dreadful name. Hearing this, the man takes a deep breath, immediately concedes, and allows them into the humble home. Inside the house, they see the young Rachel desperately writhing. The man with long white hair, clearly suffering from intense pain, tightly holds his daughter in his arms. Trying to calm her lovingly, the protagonist realizes that it's not too late. So, he decides to immediately try to recruit Gillian from his past life when he met that man. It was too late. He completely gave up on life upon seeing the poor condition of the house. The protagonist understands that he may have sold everything upon witnessing the girl's suffering. Her skin is completely flushed. He feels the urgency of that important mission. So, the protagonist takes off his cloak and seriously announces that he will begin the necessary treatment immediately. At that moment, someone grabs his shoulder. It's Belinda. Clearly desperately trying to stop him right away, she insists that they should leave, clearly not knowing what the protagonist intends to do there. She worriedly says it's a serious illness that cannot be cured without the help of specialized priests, but he completely ignores her pleas, confidently asserting that he will indeed cure that young woman. Looking straight into her eyes, he firmly asks if she truly trusts him completely at that crucial moment. This makes her somewhat regain her composure, silent in the situation. Not long after, he hands her a carefully written piece of paper, asking her to immediately buy all those herbs. He emphasizes that she must be extremely quick because those ingredients are essential for the treatment. Upon closely examining the contents of the paper, Belinda realizes that it is rare knowledge from true travelers. Clearly, the protagonist has advanced in specific knowledge directly related to the art of survival. Right now, he quickly opens his bag, searching for all the necessary materials to properly concoct the medicine at this moment. The disease known as eternal punishment has no cure, but in the future, there will be a solution. Then, he started pulling out a variety of special materials from his bag, carefully arranging the jars, bottles, and tools. The biggest issue is that the cost of those materials is too high, something that is simply out of reach for many. However, he possesses a flower blessed by fairies, something extremely rare and precious. With supreme skill, he began to carefully crush that enchanted flower along with selected healing herbs. Then, he carefully placed everything into a bottle, added a special liquid, and started to stir. He shook the bottle with precise movements, ensuring that the elixir was homogeneous and properly activated. He knew that the mixture needed to rest for a few minutes before it could be used safely. As he prepared that precious elixir, the three companions closely monitored every movement of the main character. After a specific period, the elixir was completely ready. Stored in a small transparent bottle, carefully sealed, the main character then handed that bottle to the man, requesting him to immediately have his frail daughter drink it. The man wasted no time. He opened the bottle and carefully poured the liquid directly into the girl's mouth. He cradled her gently in his arms to ensure she wouldn't choke. While administering the medicine with full attention, he quickly noticed her expression, gradually beginning to show clear signs of relief and significant improvement. Her skin also started to brighten. As the powerful medicine began to take effect on her, the tears that had once flowed continuously stopped completely, giving way to a peaceful and comfortable sleep. The man beside his daughter, now left with only minor scratches, he watched her sleep with deep relief. Fergus also noticed that the red spots were disappearing quickly, and Belinda clearly saw it too. Clearly moved, the man gazed at his daughter and realized that the medicine was indeed working well. In response, the main character informed the man that, as expected, the prepared medicine was working perfectly. The man then turned to ask how he had been able to heal her if even divine powers had failed. The main character explained that the divine power of the priest is not absolute, always dependent on medical foundation. With trembling hands, the man gripped the young man's arm. Deeply moved and grateful for the help, kneeling before him, he asked in a trembling voice if his daughter would really be completely healed soon. The main character looked directly into his eyes, responding that in a few months, she would fully recover. The answer instantly brought hope to the man's heart. The man had lived in complete despair until that moment. With that, he placed a hand on his chest. He bent deeply and asked what he should offer in return at that moment. The man realized that fate had led him to the young master just when it was needed. He honestly admitted that right now all he had was an old, seemingly useless body. He declared that if necessary, he would allow himself to be treated like a dog without hesitation. He also said that if the young man wanted to make him a slave, he would accept that fate without resistance. However, the Duke firmly replied that he didn't need a slave but needed Captain Gillian. The man could hardly believe it when he realized that the protagonist's hand was pointing directly at him. In that decisive moment, he also noticed the deep blue in the young man's eyes. Immediately recognizing it as the eyes of a true dreamer, he grasped his long white braids. He prepared himself to make the final irreversible decision. With a precise swing of the axe, he instantly cut off all those white braids without hesitation, tossing the hair to the ground. As if that gesture symbolized a final farewell to a previous empty life, all of this took place before the four people who were watching intently. They were completely speechless in the face of the instantaneous transformation of the protagonist's three companions. Almost unable to believe what they were seeing, the change in that mighty man was too great. It was hard to understand how someone who was once the captain of brutal mercenaries could now act so humbly and loyally just after cutting his hair. His expression had completely changed. Even his eyebrows seemed higher and more confident. His entire demeanor transformed instantly, and the man who once slouched now stood tall. Looking straight into the protagonist's eyes, he asked if anyone other than those present was looking for him. The protagonist answered decisively, clarifying that only those who were there mattered. Then, while searching among the available weapons, he asked if anyone had a grudge against the young friends. The protagonist replied with absolute sincerity, saying yes, and that there would be more in the near future. Faced with that answer, the man gripped a spear tightly, saying that in that case, he needed to act immediately. Shortly after, he threw the spear with tremendous force, demolishing part of the wall of that modest house without mercy. He quickly pulled a rope tied to the spear, revealing that something was being dragged through the thick forest. He quickly pulls a rope tied to the spear, revealing that something is being dragged through the dense forest. As he pulls, something resists until finally someone appears. Trapped in that cleverly crafted trap, he easily grips the intruder by the neck, leaving him completely immobile before their eyes while the victim trembles in fear. The large man firmly asks who sent him to that specific place. The intruder can barely say anything, just as he was about to finish his sentence. His chance was abruptly cut off. Captain Gizlane looked directly at the protagonist, simply asking what he should do with a captured person. The protagonist deduced who had sent him. The man was considering whether to draw his sword as he reached for the hilt. Gizlane immediately stopped him, insisting on handling it himself, saying he would take care of that little issue himself. He tightened his grip around the intruder's neck. Then, he simply threw the man away with great force, far from there without a hint of regret. Afterward, he maintained a respectful stance, bowing his head gently, and once again placed his hand on Belinda's chest, clearly noticing that the man did not hesitate for a second in faithfully carrying out the given orders. She looked at the scene with curiosity, wondering why her young master would recruit such a dangerous person. However, in that moment, the man solemnly swore that from that day forward, he would place his life in the hands of the Lord. Smiling kindly, the protagonist calmly replied that he looked forward to working alongside him. Away from that location in a wooden house near the river, a meeting was taking place inside the members of the Wild Cats, a notorious and fearsome mercenary team strategizing. Their leader was clearly agitated by the chaos, immediately demanding absolute silence from everyone. It was crucial that no one made a sound because this man, Diego, proved to be extremely superior when he noticed they had crossed the line. One of the subordinates quickly apologized to the stern captain to achieve silence. Diego had responded while relaying important information that the spy Bernard had gathered. According to Bernard, their target should be near that unit following the trail. However, Diego had become enraged. Upon discovering that Gizlane had allied with the current protagonist, his anger was so intense that he grabbed the spy by the throat, squeezing with brutal strength, his furious eyes demanding the messenger to confirm with absolute certainty the information that had been conveyed. Trembling and gasping in Diego's grip, the man assured that he had seen everything. Clearly, Diego knew that Gizlane was extremely dangerous. After all, he had once been his legendary captain. Meanwhile, Gizlane was pulling the carriage with a calmness that seemed to defy all danger. Belinda complained about the cramped space squeezed by the excessive weapons being transported in the overloaded carriage. She wondered if the man really needed to carry all the weapons from that armory. Hearing her complaints, Jacqueline promised he would buy another carriage in the future, especially to make Rachel feel more comfortable in the carriage. Behind them were Fergus and Ricardo, who were providing escort and protection from behind. Jacqueline then replied that Belinda needed to hold on tight, because every item had an essential use. He knew very well that the road ahead was extremely dangerous, and escaping that gap was a priority. Linda was suspicious. She asked if the observer they had captured earlier was sent by Miss Amelia, raising her doubts, because she noticed that the mask the spy used bore the cat emblem. This detail clearly indicated the Wild Cats, a powerful and notorious mercenary association in that area. Upon hearing this, Chillin merely murmured lightly, showing a bit of annoyance. Although he tried to stay calm, he remembered very clearly that the Wild Cats were involved in smuggling, trafficking, and other crimes. Belinda said that group was disgusting, accepting any kind of job without any integrity. The protagonist found it interesting since she knew a lot of details. Although she had never left the castle, still, he accepted her excuse when she said she had heard all of this around. He then looked directly at Belinda and assured her that everything would be fine, no exceptions after all. They had Gizlane beside them, an incredibly helpful man, strong and almost unstoppable as they continued their journey. The starry night concealed the subtle traces of the aura left by the pursuer, who had surrounded the carriage, forming a perfect loop like a deadly trap. However, nothing escaped the keen eyes of the experienced mercenary captain. Julian was seasoned and unafraid as the carriage continued its route. Wildcats emerged silently from the shadows. Immediately, Julian drew two different weapons from his back. Clearly realizing he had fallen into an ambush, two enemies approached simultaneously. But Julian defended against both, using his weapons with perfect accuracy. The man's proficiency seemed limitless, repelling both attacks at just the right moment. He then delivered a warning strike with his axe, forcing one of them to retreat immediately. He had to lightly cut one of the opponents, taking the first two completely out of the fight. As the carriage moved forward, new traps appeared, triggered by cleverly camouflaged wires among the trees and branches. but Julian's vigilant eyes remained focused as he drove the carriage. Still sharp as ever, he quickly realized that this specific trap came from above. Requiring a precise control with the reins, he pulled them at the right moment, preventing any damage to the carriage and horse. Inside the carriage, only Lane was ready for an ambush. When they were completely surrounded by enemies, suddenly many members of the Wildcats appeared, blocking every possible escape route for the group. Among them was Vigo, who stepped closer, mockingly welcoming former Captain Gillian with utter disdain as a man. Gillian, with his white beard and stern gaze, only responded with a deeply reproachful look. The leader of the Wildcats was clearly agitated, accusing Gillian of cowardice for abandoning the old guild. He bitterly complained that it was because of him, that he had to live a life he never wanted for himself. Even when insulted, Gillian remained silent, listening as Vigo asked if he had completely lost his mind. Frustrated by being ignored, Vigo vowed to make the old man remember, even if it meant using force. He ordered his subordinates to ensure no one was left unscathed, initiating an attack in a closed formation. Inside the carriage, Ghislaine calmly asked Gillian if he needed help in that chaotic situation. The man observed the approaching enemies, calmly replying that this seemed like a personal matter between them. Without hesitation, he prepared his small axe and began attacking any enemy that appeared before them. Meanwhile, Diego continued shouting. Surprised that Gillian hadn't lost any of his sharpness, Gillian was as usual, wielding two different weapons, one in each hand with unmatched skill. He was extremely talented at using both types of weapons perfectly, whether right or left-handed. Even so, the mercenaries advanced like flies, brutally taken down one by one. Despite being defeated multiple times, the mercenaries couldn't recognize the vast gap in skill between them. From afar, Diego noted that his former captain still retained that extraordinary strength, so he decided to execute his plan, ordering his unit to split into two groups, trying to surround Gillian from both sides. But Gillian had anticipated that exact move. After all, he didn't become the captain of Ratatosk by chance. Suddenly, he mounted his horse. Surprising everyone and immediately drawing a new weapon, he held a long spear. The spear had two heads with sharp axe blades. He charged towards the enemy on horseback, spinning that weapon like a deadly fan. That's why any mercenary must master every type of weapon to survive in that brutal and hostile world. The mercenaries try to surround the horse, searching for a blind spot, but they can't get close. Gillian's weapon spins so fast. It looks like a rotating blade that could crush bones. Even after taking down many enemies, one more appears, and one now tries to launch a surprise attack from above. However, Gillian is not caught off guard. He draws out a sturdy shield, protecting himself absolutely effectively and safely. The attacker charges him with full force, but is perfectly blocked. Slamming into the heavy shield, Diego shouts that he will ruin Gillian's life. Just as Gillian ruined his life, equipped with multiple blades between his fingers, Diego swears he will take revenge at all costs, quickly throwing several knives at the horse's neck. The horse feels the impact almost immediately. It can't handle it and falls down. Forcing Gillian to jump to the ground at the last moment, Diego tried to take advantage, attacking with a short blade, but Gillian managed to block it just in time. With his excellent skills with the shield, he unleashed a powerful strike, making it clear that he was no longer the captain of Ratatosk. That declaration completely rattled Vigo, confused between shock and disappointment about what he had heard. Realizing this wouldn't be easy, Diego took a few steps back, carefully assessing the enemy. Now with a serious expression, he asked what Gillian had become if he was no longer the captain. Gillian, holding his weapon with intense demeanor, coldly replied that he had completely abandoned that shameful past. Standing firm, he declared resolutely that now he was just a loyal subordinate of Lord Gizlane. Upon hearing that, Viego became desperate. He could never imagine receiving such a cruel and humiliating answer. Completely mad, he charged at Gillian recklessly. Determined to end everything at all costs, the battle between the two captains was still fierce. Their punches tore through the air violently, neither accepting defeat as they planted their feet firmly on the ground. Trying to hold their ground, the captain of the Wildcats harbored deep resentment and bitterness towards that powerful man. He would never forgive the man for completely altering the course of his life. Meanwhile, the protagonist, the escort, just stood by observing everything, maintaining absolute silence and always alert. The attacks, blocks, and counterattacks followed one another, making this duel increasingly intense and impressive. Because that captain had been directly trained by Gillian, defeating him would be much harder than it seemed. The Wildcat had a footwork technique that seemed almost supernatural, fast, and with absolute precision. He circled around his opponent, searching for an opening, continuously analyzing for any lapse in defense. At a certain moment, the mercenary captain blocked, but his shield had shattered into pieces. Vigo then shouted that he had been trained to dedicate his life to the mercenaries of Rabato. He stated it was incomprehensible how that man could give up everything to become a pawn of a pampered noble. Vigo's bloodthirsty gaze intensified as he said he would never forgive that former captain. With hatred in his eyes, he threw all 3 weapons at once, executing his strongest attack yet. But that great man was no novice. He knew exactly how to control the movements of the weapons. He skillfully navigated the bullets, preventing any blades from touching his tough skin. However, all Wildcat wanted was to create an opening in the enemy's defense. Realizing this, he quickly devised strategies and attempted bold moves to finally create a deadly opening. But Gizlane was also patiently waiting for that moment, wishing to end the battle once and for all. The opponent believed that Gizlane could no longer maintain his former strength. Therefore, he thought victory was just a matter of time and relentless pressure. However, as they fought, Gizlane showcased high-level techniques, surprisingly well calculated. The Wildcats' captain couldn't comprehend how someone with such skill was wasting time. Trying to heal a girl, knowing this, Vigo continued his relentless assault. Confident that this man was no longer his opponent, with a swift move, he retrieved 3 of his weapons, finding the perfect opportunity to throw them again. However, he didn't know that his opponent had brought a reinforced piece of metal, completely protecting his shoulder. Because of this, the blades couldn't penetrate, but he realized that the enemy was looking for an opening, trying to launch a surprise attack. The leader of the Wildcats crawled forward and then turned back, appearing from above, certain that this would end the fight. He executed a powerful and precise punch from above. What he didn't expect was that the man had focused too much mana. Reinforcing the strength of his hands, he gripped the blade with his bare hands. He wondered whether that revenge truly mattered when he realized the massive amount of mana Gizlane was using. He understood that he wasn't fighting seriously. That was the moment he realized he was in trouble. About to be completely defeated, Gizlane ruthlessly counterattacked, violently throwing the leader of the wild leopards away without mercy. The leader of the wild leopards flew and was thrown forcefully. Crashing into a tree, dizzy and struggling to get up, he faced the huge man approaching him. Holding one of the weapons thrown at him, Gizlane asked why he had never sought revenge before. Vigo replied that there was something his former captain didn't know about the situation. He confessed that he had been to Gillian's house before, but he had never found any Captain Ratatouille there. He told Gizlane that at that time he only found an old, weak man, pitiful and not worth confronting. That's why he felt confused about where the person he admired had disappeared to for so many years. After hearing this story, Gizlane fell silent. He thought for a few seconds about everything he had heard, then he stepped back a few paces. Had disappeared for many years. After hearing this story, Gizlane fell silent. He thought for a few seconds about everything he had heard, then he stepped back a few paces. Throwing down the sword he had taken from his opponent, he reached behind him. Drawing his sword, he stated that it was a body bound by the will of another. But at that moment, he would show his old comrade the respect he deserved. He solemnly raised the sword, and declared that he would fight as the true captain of the Ratatosk Mercenaries. This declaration seemed to please Vigo's ears, who was ready to attack. Now, for the first time, they seemed to be speaking the same language, standing at the ideal distance for battle. Once again, the swords clashed together, both ceaselessly seeking the opportunity to inflict the lethal damage they had long desired. The leader of the wild leopards shouted excitedly that this was exactly what he had always waited for. The strikes were so fast that it was hard to follow, making the movements almost unnoticeable. Amidst the slashes, dodges, and defenses, both were approaching an almost perfect level. Both were rigorously trained with bodies forged for war, knowing this battle would not end easily. One of them would need to make a mistake, opening a critical gap, and finally Vigo saw his chance, believing that blow would end everything with a brutal victory. However, overconfidence led him to make a small mistake, lowering his guard for just a moment. In combat, such a mistake means death, as lowering one's guard means imminent failure. Even after receiving a deep cut in his side, Diego continued to fight fiercely. Never giving up, Gizlane kept his promise, warning that he would show no mercy. Fighting as the captain of the Ratatosk Mercenaries, and in the moment, he prepared for the final blow. He declared that he would remember the commander he respected, called the commander of Unit 5. Looking straight into his eyes as an equal, a sign of honor when facing the defeated, he realized that despite everything, he had finally received the recognition he deserved. Vigo, even nearing the end, still smiled with satisfaction, because he was recognized by the person he always wanted attention from. Only the one who failed lay on the ground, with the footprints of the victor surrounding him. As usual, Gizlane bent down to take the weapon from the defeated and kept it as a trophy. He stood up, staring at the man who was once part of the battalion he led. Then he heard a voice from the carriage praising him, saying he did very well. Turning around, he saw it was Lord Gizlane accompanied by his servant, Belinda. Observing attentively, Belinda looked around and said they could sell the weapons of the defeated. To make some money, the man bowed his head apologetically for delaying the journey longer than expected. The protagonist looked closely at the man and realized he was much more impressive than he had imagined. He recalled the stories he heard about him in his childhood, when his feats were almost considered miraculous. Gizlane reached into his pocket and asked if the man knew exactly who that opponent was. Holding the weapon of the defeated man, he replied firmly that he clearly remembered who that person was. He said that man was an old teammate, a warrior who was once part of his story. Hearing this, Gizlane pondered and wondered about the fate of other lost comrades. He imagined that perhaps they were still living their lives because the time for reunion had not yet come. However, he decided that one day he would recruit them again, but for now, he would focus on selling weapons. 2 days later, they were nearing Pertium territory while the carriage moved calmly. Now they carried many more weapons than at the start of the journey, which clearly displeased Belinda. The protagonist looked out at the scenery through the carriage window, feeling happy about returning home to the newcomer. However, it was just another city he would need to get used to. Gizlane then asked the new member directly what he thought about those strange lands. The polite man replied that they were good. The protagonist said he didn't need to lie to please him. After all, anyone could see that the houses were old, and any signs of renovation were still far off, Gillian commented. He had heard that those lands often warred with the savages in the north. The protagonist replied that it was precisely for this reason he was determined to solve all these problems with his own strength. Looking at the rough and hostile landscape, no one knew that the real battle was just beginning. The protagonist knew he had to protect everything related to the Duke and safeguard what he loved. The carriage then entered Pertium land via a calm and very familiar road. Belinda had caught the protagonist's attention and asked him to discreetly look in a specific direction. Glancing over, the young man's eyes widened in surprise when he saw someone he hadn't met in a long time. By the figure, he immediately recognized it was his father riding a beautiful horse with a stern expression. That imposing figure stood right in front of the main gate of the Pertium castle. As soon as they arrived, the protagonist was quickly taken inside the castle. Together with his father, they swiftly met in the main hall, where an emergency meeting was taking place. Among the important issues, they discussed the alarming decline of Pertium's military strength. They knew that this time they couldn't rely on any support from the Rayford family's army. Listening intently, the young man realized the main topic was the reconstruction of the ancient beast army. He also noticed that the faces around the table were always the same as in all previous meetings. There was Ronald, the captain of the knights, a man with a serious expression, long hair and a shiny blue armor. Next to him was Albert, the accountant, a man with a thick beard, bright hair, and extremely conservative attire. Rounding out the table was Homer, the general administrator, an older man with gray hair and a thick mustache, small eyes, and an extremely controlled way of speaking. Though young, he was the Lord of Pertium. The protagonist carried decades of experience as the King of Mercenaries. For that reason, he tried to quickly integrate into the conversation, attempting to show maturity and understanding of the current challenges. His father, Count Walter Pertium, silently observed him, always maintaining the typical rigid expression of an authoritative figure. The protagonist never liked that strict and harsh man. Although he was starting to understand his burdens, he finally realized how heavy it was to bear alone. The responsibility weighed heavily upon that vast territory. While sipping tea, the Count directly asked his son about the reason for his long absence. Without hesitation, the young man firmly replied that he had gone to visit the Rayford territory for important matters. The Count then displayed a rare expression of satisfaction, realizing that this time his son hadn't caused any trouble. Albert, the secretary, never left his paperwork, remarked that it was hard to believe the young man had won a duel. He questioned, suspiciously, whether the boy had gone out gambling again. Like before, the young man smiled and replied no, that in fact, he had been dealing with some pending work with Amelia. At that moment, Homer, the manager, cleared his throat and reminded him that, as the future lord, he should start acting serious. However, the Count thought that all of this was enough, and signaled that he wanted to end the meeting. But before that, he directly asked his son if it was true that he had dealt with Jamal and Phillips. He had heard rumors that these two had tried to do something against little Helena and wanted to confirm it. Just hearing those names made the protagonist choke. Along with a rage ready to explode, Captain Ronald suspiciously interjected, saying that he didn't believe the young man could take such an extreme measure. The protagonist knew that in fact, Ronald just wanted to avoid the truth, as both men were traitors. Not going into too much detail, the young man simply replied that they could say that was exactly what happened. Hearing those words, Ronald breathed a sigh of relief, preferring to accept half-truths rather than face the severity of the truth. However, the Count clearly realized that there was more to the story, but praised his son for the achieved results. After all, what mattered was not the method, but the fact that little Helena's life had been saved. Those words were music to the protagonist's ears, as it was the first time he received praise. Taking advantage of that rare moment, he then asked if he could make a request. Looking straight into his father's eyes, Homer immediately intervened, crossing his arms and warning that if it was money, he would kick the young man out. Ronald, for his part, agreed, recalling all the trouble the young man had caused in the recent past. He listed everything from illegally selling food to soldiers to bar incidents and business conflicts. To everyone's surprise, the protagonist explained that his request had nothing to do with money, just a special authorization. Everyone in the room exchanged glances, curiously trying to imagine what kind of spell the bold young man might be requesting. Then he stood up, looked into the eyes of each person present, and declared his request with firm determination. He wanted to be the first to step into and explore the terrifying monster forest, a territory that until then no one dared to set foot in. After the meeting ended, he gathered his loyal subordinates and casually recounted how everything had gone. He told them that his father had gone crazy, even shouted in Belinda's face, who immediately responded that she would do the same if she were in his position. Right after that, he turned to Gizlane and asked if he really knew the entire plan that had been laid out. The experienced man acknowledged that he knew, although he didn't think the idea was reasonable or wise. After all, the forest was known as a place where no one had entered and returned alive, but the protagonist felt satisfied knowing that Gizlane had agreed and was ready for such a daring mission. Belinda shouted in anger that they couldn't just leave without official permission from the Count, which they had ignored. The young man replied that the request was merely a courtesy, but his decision had already been made. Curious and doubtful, Belinda wanted to know what made him want to take such a risk. However, the protagonist couldn't reveal that because any leaked information could have extremely dangerous consequences, something he truly understood. At the entrance to the forest, there is an absurd amount of rune stones. These minerals are deeply infused with mana, highly valued by wizards. Alchemists and anyone practicing the arcane arts use it in spells, magical barriers, teleportation scrolls, summoning circles, and countless other alchemical applications. He clearly remembered that in his past life, it was Duke Delphine's influence that discovered that location. Now he possessed that privileged knowledge and, of course, intended to exploit it before anyone else did. However, Belinda still couldn't understand the real reason. Although she chose to ignore it, she was quite annoyed by this. Meanwhile, Julian warned that hiring mercenaries could be a huge mistake, as they are notoriously undisciplined. Nevertheless, the protagonist remained determined to let the veteran soldier choose only the best among those available. Gillian immediately realized he was specifically talking about the fearsome mercenaries known as Certus Mad Dogs. These guys, despite their skills, have a terrible reputation, famous for their violence, lack of discipline, and betrayal. However, the protagonist believed that as long as they were paid well, they could be extremely useful for this mission. They then decided to head to the Zimbabwe area, a land full of cliffs and dangerous paths, the territory of Cerberus from afar. A few mercenaries had observed the two travelers approaching, alerting the others about the unexpected visit. Looking through binoculars, one of them commented that, judging by their appearance, they seemed to be young nobles. However, before he could provoke any reaction, Gillian suddenly appeared, snatching the binoculars and gripping the man's neck. The man was completely terrified, struggling and begging to be released. While his teammates watched the scene in disbelief, Gillian held him so tightly that it seemed like he could easily crush the man right there. He only let go when he chose to. He threw him back toward the group, who were clearly shaken by the situation. The other mercenaries, once full of confidence, were now wondering who those two really were. Amidst the discomfort, another figure appeared. A man with a muscular build and a distinctly refined appearance smirked, commenting that it seemed he had found a young noble, and this would bring them a little joy. But as soon as his gaze landed on Gizlane, he immediately realized he had made a serious mistake. The smile vanished, instantly replaced by a serious and distrustful expression as he watched the young man approach calmly. Gizlane rode on his white horse, showing no fear or hesitation in front of the armed group. Then, he raised his hand, pointing directly at the man and ordered firmly, without hesitation or doubt. He told him to call the captain immediately, while the giant man remained still, holding a heavy weapon, merely watching the main character riding on his white horse. The young man asked who their captain really was. The brute did not respond immediately, only letting out a small, muffled laugh with no friendly expression, then began to swing his heavy chain, implying that the young noble had completely lost his mind with each swing of the chain. His voice rang out saying this was the perfect opportunity to teach about responsibility. Without warning, he threw that ruthless weapon, a chain with a spiked ball at the end. As the weapon was about to hit the young noble, he stood still, showing no clear reaction. Suddenly, something stopped the chain's advance before it could touch the main character. To everyone's surprise, the one responsible was Gillian, his bodyguard, who would never allow such an insult to happen in his presence. Everyone watched as Gillian, with a simple motion, caught the chain with his sword, preventing any hostile approach. The spiked ball, which had spun through the air with brutal force, fell to the ground with a thud. The main character knew full well that at that moment, mere words would have no real impact on those wild mercenaries, so he looked at his bodyguard and asked him to go easy. But just enough to instill fear without needing to respond verbally. Gillian pulled the chain with his sword, dragging the arm of the one holding it, demonstrating immense strength. He spun the man in the air as if he were just a sack of potatoes. Being spun violently, the mercenary screamed in desperation, pleading to be let go before fainting from dizziness, still holding tightly to the chain. Gillian slammed the man down to the ground, creating a chilling dry thud. The oddest part was that the brute's weapon now included not just the chain, but the man himself. With absolute coldness, Gillian swung the chain, throwing that man toward anyone who dared to approach them at that moment. The other mercenaries who had shown courage before now hesitated, trembling, unsure whether to help or to run away immediately. A well-equipped group, clad in armor and armed with swords and shields, none of them seemed ready to face that monster. Fed up with the pretense, the main character dismounted and strode confidently to Gillian's side. Facing the group, he crossed his arms and asked how much longer they intended to keep him waiting. His green eyes scanned each face present, demanding. They immediately summoned the captain of that timid and noisy gang. Under pressure, one of the men ran towards a tent, claiming that the leader was fast asleep. A few minutes later, all the mercenaries lined up with their spears. Finally, with minimal professional posture and respect, the captain stepped forward with steady strides, introducing himself as Kerr, the leader of the Cerberus mercenary group. The frightened group, Kara, was a man with fair skin, messy red hair, and a muscular build. Showcasing muscles that looked sculpted, he raised one eyebrow and crossed his arms. He directly asked the reason for this sudden visit. Impatiently, the main character reacted. Asking if the man really thought he had come to play around, Kara was furious, commenting that even a noble should learn more about manners and respect. Lane smirked and replied that this was actually his polite way of welcoming important guests. Smirking back, Kara said if that was politeness, he feared he didn't know what rudeness looked like. With a calmer mood, both sat inside the main tent. Where they could finally discuss important matters, the main character was very direct, clarifying that he wanted to hire this group to explore the terrifying cursed forest. Upon hearing this, some of the guards present began to murmur, clearly uncomfortable. Even talking about that cursed place made them fearful. Tor narrowed his eyes, crossed his arms, and asked what kind of crazy person would suggest such a thing. The young duke then proudly introduced himself as Gizlane Pertium, the Duke of Pertium. As soon as they heard that name, all the soldiers burst into laughter. Thinking he was just the young man from the rumors at that moment, all the respect he had earned from the initial confrontation vanished like smoke in the wind. Kara then stood up. Kicking the chair, crossing his arms, he announced that the formal negotiation was over. He ordered his subordinates to chase them both away immediately, stating he wouldn't waste time with boys playing Lord. Unfazed, Gillian gripped his weapon tightly, ready to protect his young master. While Lane sat calmly with a sharp gaze, the main character asked if the captain was afraid to enter the forest. Looking straight at him, he added that everything he had heard about the surgeon's skills was nothing but lies. Kerr felt challenged, putting his foot on the table and laughing. He said he wouldn't accept being mocked, reminding them that as mercenaries, they weren't obligated to take any job, let alone take orders from spoiled young punks. Gizlane, further provoking him, replied that it was typical of cowards to make stupid excuses, to hide their own fears. Kara's smile instantly vanished, replaced by a stern expression, clearly displeased with the direct insult. He sighed, looking up at the tent ceiling and commenting that at this point, it wasn't even worth killing him. The young man crossed his legs, closed his eyes, and declared that he wouldn't leave without what he came to find. Staring straight at Kara, he proclaimed a statement that silenced everyone, including the experienced Gillian. "I demand a Moriana recognition," he stated with a firm voice, showing no signs of hesitation as they heard this. Everyone in the tent stood completely still, staring at him as if they had seen a ghost appear. Even Gillian, who was used to his master's absurdities, didn't know how he knew about that secret tradition. Karoo, with a mix of surprise and disbelief, asked if Gizlane truly understood the weight of what he just requested. Raising an eyebrow, Gizlane replied that not only did he understand, but he also demanded it to happen immediately. No more delays. Moriana recognition was a traditional duel among mercenaries, conducted with hands tied and very specific rules. Each opponent wielding a small knife without channeling mana, and the fight took place within a defined circle. If someone stepped outside the circle, they would automatically be declared the loser, with no right to appeal. However, the most interesting part is that the loser doesn't simply surrender. They must swear complete loyalty to the winner. Kara laughed, saying that basically, the loser becomes the other's pet, blindly obeying their orders. Gillian thought in silence. How could his young master know such a specific tradition? However, refusing it would automatically mean cowardice, and no mercenary with honor would accept carrying that stain for the rest of their lives. Hearing this, Carl laughed loudly, standing up and shouting to the men to prepare everything as the match was about to start. Right there, both had their hands tied together, standing in the circle, each holding a simple knife. The mercenaries cheered for their leader, hoping he would crush that spoiled boy and end the foolishness. Commented that the boy must have heard about this somewhere and was now blatantly bluffing. Pulling Gizlane's hand, he whispered in his ear that he had made that identification 5 times already, and had won 5 times. Gizlane smiled almost wickedly, leaning close to the red-haired person's ear, and replied in a dark voice, 5 funny things, because he had done this over 100 times in his life. At that moment, Kerr realized for the first time he had accepted a fight without knowing who he was up against. After hearing those words from the protagonist, the man no longer showed the confidence he had before, With that, both quickly aimed their weapons at each other. Without hesitation, both their skills seemed very similar at first, as both successfully dodged the attacks at the same time. However, they avoided each other, staring at each other, knowing that this wouldn't be easy. They knew that the next hit would truly matter, as the first hit was just a test. Thus began something frenzied, where each strike was aimed at trying to unbalance the opponent. That recognition was something beyond imagination, where both pulled each other trying to avoid getting hit. Even when at a disadvantage, the protagonist moved fiercely, displaying extremely rich experience and absolute control over his body. He truly showcased all the experience accumulated from over 100 times in this kind of fight. However, they continued to fight without actually knocking each other down with impactful strikes. The protagonist noticed when the opponent made a strange movement with his leg, something suspicious. Immediately, he tried to evade the strike by using his leg to defend against that movement. As he did so, he clearly noticed another strange movement that the man made at that moment. Kara stared directly at him, saying he hoped the protagonist would extend. Much less when seeing that exact movement, he believed that the man had actually made many recognitions before, but he refused to believe that it was more than 100, thinking that claim was a lie. With that, he charged forward, determined to end the fight immediately. The atmosphere was filled with cheers, the mercenaries eagerly cheering for their captain to win. However, every time the captain looked straight at them, they lost a bit of the spontaneous excitement among the crowd. Gizlane realized that this was a complete failure of a battle. The arena was small enough that any imbalance would cause someone to fall to the ground. Moreover, the rule of not using mana power forced them to fight only with pure strength. Interwoven arms severely restricted freedom of movement, making everything much more tiring and risky. He clearly noticed that his little master could barely dodge, block, and attack at the same time. Watching from afar, Gizlane believed the opponent had complete control and was dominating the battle. He thought if the situation worsened further, I will intervene to protect my little master from a heavier blow. The main character found himself in a bad situation, resulting in him being thrown up while the opponent tried to use that to throw him. However, this didn't happen, as the main character managed to adjust his body in time. He landed back on his feet, but he started to feel pain. Right at the spot where he had previously blocked, he realized that the damage was much greater. Due to the absence of mana, which usually protects against impacts, the opponent was laughing, believing the main character was pale, clearly nearing his limit. As he attacked, the red-haired guy thought the man was just being stubborn and resisting for no reason. He looked on with derision. Believing he could easily predict the next moves, he thought the main character's strategy was simplistic. Just block or dodge, nothing more. He also noticed how many times the enemy had blocked attacks directly with his body, with no other choice. He knew very well that there was no mana. Every impact was felt fully and brutally. The main character also realized that the opponent had noticed his increasing difficulties, especially in his legs. With a smile, the opponent seemed to enjoy seeing his foe suffer. For him, that painful look was what made the fight truly satisfying. He began to make some moves with his sword. Preparing for the next decisive strike, he even attacked with full force. The red-haired guy still couldn't take down the determined little master. The fight continued just like it had from the start. With no clear advantage for either side, the main character continued to block, resisting and standing firm, refusing to fall before that opponent. At one point, the two armed arms crossed. The main character understood the opponent's intention. He clearly saw that the man was once again preparing to use his knee as a weapon. Aware of this, he positioned his already hurt leg again, knowing it would serve as a shield. Each time he did so, the pain surged tremendously. But he knew it was necessary. The red-haired guy disdainfully said that it was enough and there would be no more chances. He raised his weapon in a different manner, ready to end the training session once and for all without further delay. Everyone present knew that the conclusion was near, and now it seemed completely unavoidable. In response, Gizlane skillfully drew the weapon from his back, preparing to intervene without hesitation. The blonde boy smiled lightly, realizing that a worthy encounter was finally about to begin. As the red-haired man attempted his simple punch, he failed miserably, shocking everyone. For the first time, he left a bizarre gap, something that should never have happened. At that moment, he glanced aside as he saw the protagonist dodge a blow that no one had ever dodged before with that move. The main character almost rewrote the entire circle, completely stepping outside the predetermined path. As a result, he succeeded in striking the red-haired person in the ribs, hitting an unprotected rib. The man could hardly believe that he had actually been hit, and everyone was completely stunned. Even Gizlane was shocked, like the mercenaries who witnessed everything unfold. Now, the red-haired person could no longer afford to make a mistake. Every move had to be executed perfectly. But driven by rage, his senses had weakened significantly, making him more prone to mistakes. That was exactly what the main character wanted to do: destabilize and break his mental focus, and force him to slip up. Everyone present grew tense as the young man succeeded in seriously injuring their captain. Still, many believe the captain was just playing around and didn't take it seriously. However, every hit the main character threw now was precise, each aimed directly at the red-haired person. He began striking at his neck, mouth, and face with fierce elbow blows, still holding onto the dagger tightly. The main character refused to use it to stab lethal spots. He preferred to throw multiple punches at the man's face. Before preparing a blade strike, he did not hesitate to stab the dagger into the arm of the red-haired person. Clarifying his calculated intent, as expected, the pain drove the man completely insane. Losing all control over his emotions, he couldn't understand how the boy, who had struggled just a few minutes ago, had suddenly become so cold and merciless. Meanwhile, the main character calmly observed the hatred on his opponent's face. It took a while, but Gizlane finally understood the exact strategy his teacher had applied. The young man had tensed up, overloaded his joints, and forced his body to endure. At the same time, he let his opponent control the power so he could later adjust its weight. In that way, he was no longer fighting against the attacks but instead controlling the entire rhythm. Once he established his own rhythm, he began unleashing a series of precise consecutive blows. Seeing this, Gizlane sighed in relief and put away his weapon, realizing he no longer needed to intervene. The other mercenaries shouted in desperation, pleading for their captain to fight back. They were about to become a laughingstock. However, the main character stared at that man, realizing that his resilience was truly admirable. He said that any other enemy would have broken the rules to escape such a desperate situation. The red-haired person smiles, admitting that for the first time, it seems like the protagonist has actually done everything. He says that anyone who becomes a captain does so through recognition. They all know that they cannot break the rules they must abide by. The protagonist enjoys hearing that, especially from the red-haired person who now admits he is at a disadvantage. He realizes that simply overwhelming the enemy is no longer enough, because there's a second fundamental condition. The red-haired person begins to exert excessive force on their crossed arms, aiming to force the other to fall. He intends to win by using the rule that anyone who steps out of the circle will automatically lose. He believes it doesn't matter how skilled the protagonist is. Just one step outside and he will immediately lose. Victory seems certain. All that's left is to wait until the little prince steps out. However, at the crucial moment, the protagonist moves his body in a strange way, something that has never been seen before. He adjusts his weight, redirects his power, and manages to return to the circle using the red-haired person. To reinforce this, he kicks the red-haired person's leg, forcing him to stagger back and pull him along. They are tightly bound by a rope. If one falls, the other cannot avoid being pulled down too. The protagonist's plan succeeds perfectly, repositioning him inside the circle, and he regains full control of the fight, showing that only someone who has completed over 100 recognitions knows how to execute such a move, finishing by slamming the red-haired person's face into the ground, precisely outside the boundary line of the circle, resulting in the opponent's head hitting the ground outside the line. Ensuring victory, all the mercenaries watch in shock, realizing their captain has lost. In a completely humiliating and abrupt manner, the man who was so close to victory lost everything in just a few seconds. The protagonist looks down and clearly states what everyone there already knows: he has defeated the captain. And there's nothing they can say to refute that. The red-haired person doesn't understand, wants to know who could perform such feats. Looking serious, the protagonist replies that he doesn't like his attitude and demands more respect. He then forcefully pulls the man's arm, forcing him to stand up while still talking. The red-haired person responds that the fight is over and there's no need to continue. However, the protagonist laughs and replies, "No, you haven't stepped out of the circle," and he prepares a punch, warning that now. "You haven't stepped out of the circle and prepared a punch," he warned that now. He would personally teach that subordinate some manners, so after preparing for the punch, he needed to teach his new subordinate a lesson, and once again, the man fell down with his face towards the outside of the circle. The red-haired one raised his hand in front, trying to protect himself while desperately shouting that the rules were clear as day. He couldn't step out of the circle, but this only taught him another lesson. He took another direct punch to the face, the protagonist. Then he asked if he intended to follow the rules on the battlefield, while saying this, he applied a few more lessons to the beaten face of that guy. As the one with red hair tried to react, the protagonist told him to shut up immediately. Anyway, he wasn't allowed to let his subordinates speak at that moment. Before the man could say he was crazy, he received another dose of discipline. The young duke seemed to enjoy educating that guy quite a bit. Quite forcefully, the other mercenaries didn't even know if it was right, allowing him to continue punching their leader, as the face of the one with red hair became swollen. He desperately cried out, asking him to stop, saying he didn't want to learn anymore, because he had learned all that was necessary. Yet once again, the protagonist dragged the man back into the circle mercilessly, punching him in the face again. He warned that the man wasn't finished yet. Now it seemed the one with red hair finally understood exactly what he was trying to convey. He yelled while looking at his men, asking if they were going to stand by and watch this. The mercenaries tried to muster the courage to help their leader in this completely asymmetric slaughter. However, they were immediately discouraged by Gizlane menacingly holding his small axe. With a terrifying atmosphere, Gizlane made it clear that anyone who intervened would be crushed. Immediately with this, everyone understood that it would be much wiser to wait for the Duke to finish his lesson. The one with red hair realized that no one dared to intervene. Now found himself in an incredibly complicated situation, his face marked irrationally by the long minutes of discipline that he had received up to that point. The protagonist looked straight into the eyes of the one with red hair and asked if he had finished his tragedy yet. Then he tightened his fist again. Signaling that the lesson wasn't over yet, he educated the one with red hair once more, until that person understood that not all nobles are the same. Unlike the nobles he knew, this one wasn't a useless bully nor a self-satisfied, ruthless person. One of those who only pays mercenaries to boost their ego. For this reason, the one with red hair earned the notorious name Mad Dog over the years. At that moment, he was clearly losing to a kid with a stronger punch. A noble was training him to exhaustion, gripping his arm mercilessly. The mercenaries around watched with concern, thinking that if this continued, their leader might die. The protagonist stared at the man, wondering if that was enough. He quickly glanced at the mercenaries around and asked what they were waiting for. They said they should immediately go get water, bandages, and towels before the captain passed out. Everyone understood that the lesson was over and could finally intervene without fear. At the entrance of the venue, a wooden sign clearly displayed the Cerberus group's emblem. While all this was happening, Gizlane simply observed and contemplated how mysterious that man was. It was strange to see irregular mercenaries obeying the orders of a young noble. Naturally, the protagonist insisted that they must bring water, grab towels, and bring bandages. The red-haired guy knew that in the mercenary world where fists prevailed, something had changed. The young noble had shown who really was in control, turning the mad dog into a loyal pup. As the red-haired guy recovered a bit, he saw the protagonist place a contract on the table, and the young noble pointed to where he should sign. With ink and a brush prepared, the red-haired guy, his face completely swollen, looked at him with a slightly sad expression, reluctantly taking the brush and signing in the designated spot. Without any objections, as soon as he finished, he mumbled in a low voice, sarcastically calling the protagonist baby. Without thinking, the young noble's expression immediately stiffened, and he seriously asked about what he just said, fearing another lesson. The red-haired guy quickly shrank back and said it would be a pleasure. He said he would be very happy to work with him from now on, without any issues. As the protagonist gripped the red-haired guy's arm, he feared getting punched in the face again. However, the young noble simply said that from now on, they were part of the same family like brothers. He also mentioned that he hoped they would get along very well working with the red-haired guy from then on. After that agreement, a few days passed and the area around Pertium's territory became busy. The soldiers were in a ready stance, chatting casually, not understanding why they were summoned so early. Some people yawned, not knowing why they were called there so early in the morning. There were rumors that the one who hired them was the young noble in charge of that land. They thought it would be an easy job since the boy seemed completely harmless. Suddenly, a muscular man clapped his hands, asking everyone to pay attention to him. That's Gordon, the brawny guy everyone knows, always standing out in a crowd. He said that to deal with that punk, they need to choose a representative to make demands. He volunteered to be the representative since he has the perfect stance and knows how to negotiate with the nobles. He explained that if they don't unify their voices, they won't get everything they want there. His speech seemed to convince the others to agree to let Gordon be their spokesperson. A bald man next to him looked skeptical and asked what exactly Gordon planned to do. He replied that he intended to pressure the kid, demanding extra compensation for the work. He told everyone to start putting money in their pockets, solidifying his role as their representative. As they argued, they noticed someone approaching, so they quickly straightened their posture. From a distance, they saw a person riding a white horse coming toward them. They quickly recognized it was the young lord of the Pertium territory, just the person they were waiting for. Judging by the attire, they were sure it was their boss, even though he was completely alone. Gordon, with all his confidence, told everyone to put on fierce faces to intimidate the kid. He truly believed he was about to teach that punk how everything works in the real world. However, something caught his eye that sent chills down his spine and made his hands start to sweat. The young lord was not alone. A number of notorious mercenaries began to appear behind him. Among them was the fearsome mercenary captain and, of course, the crazy one, Cerberus. One of the group immediately recognized the shape of the helmet. It was the mercenary Cerberus. The red-haired man and his crew walked silently, heads down, not daring to say a word. When the protagonist finally arrived, he noticed. The reception was completely different from what Gordon had imagined. The young lord looked at everyone. Clearly, seeing they were now extremely obedient, he then turned to the large man and calmly asked whether he was the representative. The brawny man trembled. He bowed his head and replied almost inaudibly that yes, his name was Gordon, sweating cold as he said his name. He remembered that he had planned to teach the kid a lesson, showcasing all his diplomatic abilities. The protagonist gently patted the large man on the shoulder, introducing himself formally. as the young lord of the Pertium territory, stating his name with determination. Upon hearing this, the expressions of the mercenaries immediately turned somber, realizing their huge mistake. Turning away, the protagonist ordered Gordon to gather all the mercenaries, and they immediately followed him, after which he announced to them in a serious tone that they would soon begin the exploration mission in the Beast Forest near the Beast Forest. Many tents have been set up to shelter the warriors. The main character knows that preparations are nearly complete to finally explore that hostile and dangerous environment while he observes his loyal servant, Belinda, who has treated him with kindness, care, and affection. She helps him put on each piece of armor, adjusting the straps and other strategic accessories. He thinks he has a temporary base, searching for resources and a significant army. When mentioning the army, he means the mercenaries now officially under his command, completely trusting Belinda. He requested her to perform one more count to confirm the numbers. She quickly looked, adding 148 hired mercenaries for the Cerberus group with 41 mercenaries brought by the main character. A total of 192 warriors. Looking at her, he asked if she had informed the army commander about all these details. Belinda replied that she had, although she initially thought he would oppose going into the forest. However, they ensured that they would not be detected as they entered discreetly, avoiding issues with the local guards. With that, the main character felt excited as everything was going according to plan up to that point. He quickly got the attention of all the mercenaries, asking them to pay attention to his words. With his thumb pointing back, he announced to them that the destination would be the terrifying monster forest he had warned about, with countless monsters and unidentified threats, and the hidden dangers in that dark and perilous environment made many look worried, because that place is known to be a real and terrifying monster den. As they began to interrupt his speech, Melinda immediately became angry, extremely displeased with the blatant disrespect. The main character then clarified that if they wanted, they could leave without any issues. However, if the mission succeeded, he would pay 3 times the original agreement. As soon as they heard this excessive offer, everyone changed their minds and decided to stay and carry out the mission immediately. Despite that, Belinda quietly approached and whispered in the young master's ear, asking if he was crazy. He calmly replied that if everything went smoothly, he would have enough money to pay everyone without difficulty. Then he looked her in the eye and directly asked if she really trusted his decision. Belinda took a deep breath and replied that she had no choice but to trust him again. As she always did, the red-haired girl also thought the young master was completely insane for offering such ridiculous amounts without considering the consequences. On the contrary, Gizlane understood her boss very well and knew that he always had a secret card. The main character stepped forward in front of everyone and commanded the mercenaries to follow him immediately. Soon the first steps were taken towards the dark forest, a place with a truly suffocating atmosphere. Once inside, they began to cut down some trees to make tents, a shelter, and storage space for items. The destruction quickly took place, allowing them to clear the way and protect themselves from the impending dangers of that hostile area. They had chopped down many ancient trees that may have stood there for centuries, resisting time. The protagonist felt satisfied, especially when seeing the light in the sky cutting through the newly opened spaces in the forest. He immediately ordered them to continue cutting trees in the direction he pointed. With complete confidence, he directed that the trees must be cut in a straight line, turning that space into a real strategic pathway. He also ordered them to dig around the roots to make the removal less labor-intensive. He thought that he had learned these techniques in a past life. When he deeply studied mining and territorial expansion, he knew that this place was vast, and one day they would drive all the monsters out of here for good. He thought that the more resources he exploited, the greater the expansion of the expedition would be. It was frustrating to be conspired against by his family. The red-haired girl looked over and realized that even the boss was working hard like everyone else. The mercenaries commented that he was doing this to prove himself as a worthy leader. Although he was a nobleman, when Belinda heard these malicious rumors, she became angry and ordered everyone to get back to work. She kept a piercing gaze on those who spoke ill of the young lady. Mentally noting who would need to be reprimanded later, she decided to confront the whisperers directly, saying that if he was working, then everyone should too. She declared loudly that the more people helped, the faster they would finish the entire forest. She told herself that he spoke as if he had experienced that situation before. This was strange, so she stood by his side, ready to prevent anything bad from happening. Suddenly, once again, the red-haired girl seized the opportunity to mock, saying that it was all just Belinda's jealousy in a moment of distraction. Gizlane turned around and accidentally hit the red-haired girl on the back with a log. The red-haired girl immediately realized that it was intentional and asked if the big guy really wanted to fight. The protagonist watched the humorous scene, noting that up to that point, everything was going according to his plan. He knew that in the past, Duke Delphine had conquered the entire kingdom and established a powerful dynasty, perhaps thanks to the wealth of minerals, the natural resources, and control of the beasts in that forgotten forest. Now you have the chance to replicate that feat, launching a planned devastation and even using special lanterns. Yet he finds it strange that nothing has gone wrong. This makes him suspicious and highly alert, even after reading many records and reports from his previous life. He has never witnessed firsthand what is about to happen. He knows he can't let his guard down. As they are about to step deeper into a dark forest, they continue to chop down trees as they advance, clearing the way without realizing the hidden nightmares they are about to awaken. The mercenaries start commenting that the job seems too easy and that the rumors might have been exaggerated. The smug bald man kicked Gordon's back, saying he wanted his money back. However, Gordon notices something strange that nobody else seems to realize. So he immediately calls everyone's attention, asking if they have chopped down many trees by that point. Everyone confirms without hesitation. Then he looks back and anxiously asks why the path they cleared is now completely blocked. Everyone starts to realize, panicking that the trees they felled have completely recovered, completely blocking their way out. At that moment, the protagonist shouts orders for everyone to be on high alert as they are clearly in an ambush. The previously calm atmosphere now becomes heavy and tense, making everyone visibly anxious and on guard. Immediately, the protagonist calls out to Gordon, warning him to stay away from that tree or he will die right on the spot. He tells him to move slowly, with no sudden movements, just one careful step at a time. However, with Gordon's size, moving carefully like that is nearly impossible. Clumsily, he bumped into the trunk with a piece of wood he was still carrying on his shoulder. The piece of wood fell with a loud thud, and at that moment, everyone realizes that something terrible is about to happen. The mercenaries are in shock. For that noise seems to have awakened a lurking demon within those trees. The huge man looks to the side, and is completely horrified to see the trees growing in an unusual manner. It seems to be moving slowly, roots acting like legs, approaching him with a terrifying and suffocating presence. People begin to notice that something very strange and supernatural is happening with that particular tree, while the protagonist stands with his arms crossed from a distance, curious to see what will happen. The bald man tries to calm the situation, laughing and saying their boss is scared just because he is a nobleman. He calmly points at Gordon, trying to prove that nothing is happening, that is just superstition. However, the protagonist remains serious, saying that if they don't leave slowly, everyone will die soon. The bald man mocked, saying that the young noble was just making things up to scare the mercenaries for no reason. Suddenly, something from the tree swiftly grabbed the bald man as if it were a magical vine. The vine wrapped around his waist, violently pulling him while he screamed in terror, begging for help. Everyone was stunned as no one could do anything, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth ready to devour that poor soul. It was horrifying to see that creature with eyes staring hungrily at its prey and about to swallow it. The main character who was watching closely realized that it was not just a simple tree, but a terrifying monster named Iris, even after witnessing what had happened. The main character didn't have enough time to react when the monsters appeared. People started screaming that they had to run away immediately, but after clearing the forest all day, it was now the tree's turn to retaliate. Giant monsters with huge eyes appeared. They used their branches to attack people. The forest that seemed normal during the day appeared alive at night and began hunting everyone there with mouths full of sharp teeth. They used vines to capture people and carry them away as food. After putting them into their massive mouths, they simply closed them and finished chewing. Among those chained by those vines was Big Gordon, who was screaming while clinging to another tree. Meanwhile, another person tried to cut the vine wrapped around his body with an axe. The material proved to be incredibly durable. Even iron weapons couldn't cut through it. One of the mercenaries witnessing this struggle, while trying to cut one of the vines, now looked at Gordon and knew he would lose his life. He would be devoured just like the others as Gordon was pulled to be consumed by the tree. Everyone realized that his end would be similar. At that moment, the main character had to react. Thus, he focused mana into his sword. Only then could he cut the vine that was tightly holding the big man. Fortunately, the main character knew exactly what to do and saved him before worse could happen. Also using mana, he struck towards the tree's large eye. With that, the creature calmed down a bit and dropped the man to the ground. They shouted that since he had cut the tree, perhaps the weak point was the eye. Because of that, the main character became angry, realizing that no one acknowledged that he was the one who did it. The screams warned that everyone should stay alert. Lowering their guard at that moment would be asking for death. He warned that if the panic continued, that everyone would become easy targets. They should raise their shields and form a line. They should only focus on defense until he orders an attack. The shields must block the vines as they approach to attack. By then, he had gotten close to the red-haired girl and requested the lanterns. Before it was too late, he asked them to go with the lanterns to attack the monsters and burn them down. The red-haired girl understood why the man brought so many lanterns to that location. The trees could move. Everyone shouted loudly that they were getting close, and the protagonist urged everyone to attack at the same time. Without wasting time, they should throw the lanterns into the mouths of all those big trees. As the lanterns were thrown, the trees tried to block them. The red-haired girl noticed that the trees had swallowed most of the lanterns, and everyone watched to see if there would be any reaction. Barbie with her big eyes began to tremble. It seemed that the fire from the lanterns was diminishing quickly. Gizlane, with her weapon imbued with mana, started chopping at the branches. Belinda also imbued her weapon with mana and helped in the fight. She threw the spear tips directly into the big eyes of the tree, protecting herself and the young prince. The protagonist instructed both of them to prepare to throw the lanterns while protecting the mercenaries. He explained that he would attract the attention of all the monsters to himself. Holding his large sword, however, the young girl couldn't see her king moving towards the monsters. And staying calm as he swung his sword, she shouted for him to be careful. However, he was alert to everything and knew exactly which slashes to make while fighting. He had attracted their attention. Of all the monsters to himself, keeping the mercenaries safe, he swung his sword between one monster and another to keep everyone focused on him. Therefore, the lanterns began to be thrown towards the monsters. The mercenaries didn't understand that although they looked like trees, those monsters had legs. Seeing the protagonist fight against the tree monsters, everyone found it hard to believe. Anyway, he had a significant advantage over those monsters. He successfully pierced one of its eyes as it tried to get closer. Quickly, not long after, the protagonist was surrounded by many tree monsters. Some mercenaries just stood by and protected themselves behind their shields. Then came Belinda's order. It was time for everyone to throw their lanterns. At the command of the young girl, they all threw the lanterns at the same time. The damage must be significant as all the trees opened their mouths to swallow the protagonist. However, as they swallowed the lanterns, a reaction began to occur within their bodies. This reaction pleased Mad Dog and some Cerberus mercenaries. The protagonist had asked them not to laugh unnecessarily, because they need to continue and never stop. Everyone started to burn the tree monsters to ashes. They called all the troops to advance, and this was done quickly. All of them began to ignite. The mercenaries found it hard to believe and never thought they could fight against the tree monsters. However, everyone feared the entire forest with that scale of fire. Gordon believed it made sense, as the trees were weak against the flames. Since they were made of wood, the protagonist ordered that no one let their guard down. Because the battle was not over yet, he told everyone that now the trees would show their true forms. Suddenly, a massive cloud of dust began to rise from that area. They felt smoke forming a mist. But the fire had been extinguished while Belinda and Gizlane were near the protagonist. People called out to him, seeking help. At one point, Belinda asked the protagonist what was happening. He explained that inside those trees was vulnerable to fire, but not that the fire had burned them down. From within, there had been contact with something powerful. That's why smoke was rising. As it dissipated, everyone would see that they were actually giant monsters resembling stars. Tentacles and countless rows of teeth appeared. They looked like bizarre flowers. Everyone admired their resilience even in front of the flames. People felt anxious and looked towards the protagonist for a way to protect themselves. Raising his sword, he asked everyone to raise their weapons. The real battle was about to begin. For that reason, he was the first to step towards those monsters. He warned everyone that from this point on, it would be close combat and they needed to stay defensive. He told them to understand that it would be all or nothing and charged in the battle against them. Even the big guy, Fatso, found it difficult to fight hand-to-hand with those monsters. The first to follow the protagonist was the mercenary Cerberus, led by Mad Dog. Then, the young Belinda, worried about the young master, also moved towards him. Gizlane had to take the lead and ask the other mercenaries what they were waiting for. That was an order given by the young master and they should obey immediately. And that big man made it clear that they should entrust their lives to the master. With that, they realized there was no other way. If they didn't fight, they would die. They had to believe that the young master would find a way. The protagonist told them they could take down the monsters, even without using magic. After saying that, the order was to take down everything that moved. Linda and Gizlane were the first to carry out that order, so they immediately stepped up. Thus, everyone followed the protagonist and easily defeated the monsters. He knows that hesitation there is a walking disaster. His role there is to eliminate the hesitation of those following his orders, so he always leads the way. He shoved his sword into the mouth of one of those monsters, proving that it's not hard to defeat them. His precise strike pierced through and ripped apart anything that moved. He knew that by doing so, he showed everyone it was possible to turn the impossible into reality beside him. He was the first to completely take down one of those monsters and prove that it was achievable. Now the mercenaries realized that worse than the main trees was that main character. However, the little lord warned them not to let their guard down for even a second, because there could be more monsters showing up. It's no coincidence this forest is called the Beast Forest. They were just at the edge of the forest when the motivational speech left many mercenaries terrified. Just imagine what awaits deep inside. Despite that, the main character asked them not to fear anything, and that if they stayed vigilant, everything would be fine. After all, he would always be in front protecting them, and so he turned back to show them his face. He spoke firmly, asking them to trust and follow him, for with him, none of them would fall. At first, everyone was a bit hesitant, unsure whether to trust a noble. Then their voices rang throughout the forest and everyone wanted to help. He called for all of them to participate in the plan to conquer that forest. They should chop down as many trees as possible throughout the day. As night fell, everyone fought fiercely against the giant monsters. Even an orc gang appeared out of nowhere to attack them. Belinda found time to tend to some minor wounds that the main character had sustained. Many bizarre monsters appeared throughout the night, and everyone had to stay alert. They faced countless situations, including creatures that looked genetically mutated and monsters they never imagined could exist. That savage forest held countless secrets. But the crazy dog Jillian and the main character stood at the forefront, showing everyone that it was possible to win even against those massive and ferocious monsters, capable of swallowing them whole in one bite. But there is always a way. Jillian used his shield to block one of their bites. Meanwhile, the main character was stabbing his sword into as many beasts as possible, and he always checked on the mercenaries, checking if everyone was okay. Over time, they learned that to survive, they had to protect their leader's blind spots. At one point, the main character, the mad dog, and the mercenary captain observed how far they had progressed. Even so, they still had a long way to go, even among the brave. There are always those who doubt themselves, and here was no different. With a mercenary, who thought they were all crazy for being stuck there at night, the savage woods became completely different, and it was a hard place to rest. Soon, the protagonist saw a large lake. They arrived with the mercenaries and now needed to provide water. Some of them began to drink, which was completely clear. Belinda thought it was very dangerous, because no one knew where the water came from or where it went, while the protagonist just washed his hands. He realized they had made good progress by that point and decided to camp near the lake area, to rest a bit while everyone gathered around the meal. Everyone was tired but knew there was still a long way ahead. So much so that one mercenary planted the idea in everyone's head that they wanted to escape. The man said they no longer needed to risk their lives for this. He tried to convince everyone that their lives were worth more than just a pile of money. The man did everything he could to gather more people to escape with him, because he was afraid to go alone. Some refused because they had been paid, and were supposed to fulfill their roles as good mercenaries. The man admitted the leader knew how to handle a sword very well. But how long could they rely on luck, he said. It was clear that the boss would use them as shields when things went wrong. People were planning to listen to him until the end because it seemed like he had a plan. The man thought it was working because now everyone was scared. Going alone was dangerous. However, if anyone asked the man about what he just said, that they were alive only because of the leader, he would count on his fingers and point at the leader, who was taking care of the injured despite being very tired. The protagonist, with a bottle in hand, was applying some kind of medicinal solution, he said, that the person should ensure the water didn't touch the wound because it would get infected. Meanwhile, Belinda was talking to the young master, explaining that all those medicines were expensive. The protagonist continued to do his good work as the leader of the expedition. With that, the blindfolded mercenary concluded that someone like him would not abandon them. Everyone stood by that leader and believed he couldn't let them fend for themselves. The man knew who was sabotaging his plans. That was the blindfolded man. The protagonist approached and asked everyone to stop making strange movements and go to sleep. He called Jillian and Kara to talk to him in the tent. Mad Dog thought he should at least cut that man's tongue out before leaving. That's why everyone was called there. It's because they want to start counting the lanterns they have. It's incredible. They counted and there are 24. The main character notices a few are missing. The monster has been appearing behind them day and night in the forest, not many over the last 2 nights. With that, he has a perspective that Belinda and the red-haired girl want to hear. It seems the huge man with white hair realized that if they entered the territory of a monster at night, things could get bad. That's exactly what the main character is trying to say. If they get caught, things will get tough. In the tent, he hears a sound bothering him. He looks toward the forest and knows they're now in the real beast forest. As night falls, the camp becomes quiet. Everyone is finding a corner to sleep. While the big guy Gordon sleeps, a lantern seems to fly close to his neck. He seems to hear something coming very close to his ear. The light from the lantern wakes the big man. He starts to listen to the sound. His eyes widen as he notices the lantern flying. He starts to tremble. It's strange. So he jumps up because he's never seen a lantern fly in front of him. He also feels as if the monster is sniffing close to his neck, as if it wants to bite him. Everyone realizes when the big man starts swinging at the air from somewhere. They look at him. They don't understand as he grabs a weapon and starts swinging as if there's something there. A monster that only he can see has yelled for him to stay away. Immediately, everyone approaches to ask what's happening while he strikes at the air. The big man, sweating profusely, explains that he saw a monster so close it started smelling him. Those people start to doubt whether the big guy is really okay, no matter how much they looked around. They see nothing and conclude that he's imagining things. When he looks back, he realizes that whatever was close has disappeared. He tries to explain that he's not crazy, but everyone thinks it was just a nightmare. Another person, a mercenary, approaches them and says that the big guy isn't crazy. In fact, the man with the eye patch and another guy with a scar woke up and saw the lantern flying. Not only them, but many others saw that phenomenon happen near them. With that, the frightened man concludes that it's no longer an illusion but the truth. Something is circling the camp. Perhaps it's the night monster. The main character has arrived and realizes that they understood the severity of the situation. Everyone wants to talk to him about what's happening, but he asks them to stay calm. He says they should focus, because he will tell them everything that's happening. Everyone gathers outside the tent. While the main character and his closest allies are inside a meeting, Gordon is one of the people in the tent with the leader. And upon hearing that there are actually monsters, he becomes very frightened. The scared man also finds it strange that he knows this, because even they haven't seen clearly yet. The main character seriously states that they might have started tracking everyone. As they approach the lake, one of the monsters that dominate the beast forest at night is called the Stalker. They can hide in the darkness, making them invisible, and physical attacks have no effect on them. They are shocked when the leader says there are hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Belinda concludes that this is why the lanterns have disappeared. One by one, the red-haired girl feels annoyed realizing they are just toying with them, and she leaves the tent to eliminate them. However, the commander's orders are different. He has to wait for them to attack first. Belinda states an undeniable fact. The lanterns are disappearing. The main character warns that if they attack right now, that will immediately alert the enemy. The plan is to eliminate all of them at once, so they will pretend not to see them. Julian wants to know if he really intends to face thousands of invisible and deadly monsters at once, and the answer is yes. The main character explains that everyone outside has scrolls, and that he will explain how they will fight. He draws some lines on the ground with his sword, and says that the opposing group is focusing on surrounding them. Drawing on the ground, he explains that their numbers are few, and they have stolen the lanterns, advancing in groups. Continuing the drawings on the ground, he warns that the longer they wait, the more monsters will gather. Now Jillian understands why they built the camp. With their backs facing the lake, the main character says they are at a disadvantage. But this is not the end, as they will be the ones to strike first. Of course, everyone looks at him to understand what that initiative will be. He continues to draw on the ground and says that dividing the unit into 3 is the best strategy. The shield group will consist of the servants, who will hold off the enemy's attack. Then comes the archer unit, who will delay the monsters. Finally, the attack unit will go all out under his command, using all kinds of weapons. The drawings on the ground show that the shield and archer groups will be at the center, blocking the enemy's advance, while the elite attack unit will target the weak points. This becomes clear through the drawings he is creating. He points to another drawing and says, "That will ensure their victory." Everyone observes the sketches on the ground. The main thing is that the shield and archer group must endure as long as possible. Belinda asks everyone to calm down because she had something to say. She had a question. If the monsters can't be harmed by physical attacks, how will they defeat them? With that, the protagonist just glanced at her while everyone waited for his reaction. He stared at the girl and said he figured it out. It would be with magic scrolls. This was required for the whole group while maintaining formation. They will hold strong until the commander breaks it. The monsters have taken the last lantern, and now something is heading towards them. The protagonist knows about the formation, because it was written in the newspaper he read in his previous life, and he thought about it while walking. While observing the scrolls, he knows those monsters are weak against light. That's why when a light source appears, they will reveal their true forms. And with that, the protagonist ripped a piece of paper upon seeing that they activated all the magic scrolls at once. They have to use that magic first. That's right, everyone is casting it. After activation, the lights in the sky will attract everyone's attention. They will move towards the reinforcements to the location indicated by the lights. Many of them will be affected by the brightness on the way and won't even be able to get close. With that, the shield group noticed the darkness had vanished, and their true forms were horrifying. However, they need to be careful because despite their strange appearance, they can be very dangerous. The next team is archers preparing their arrows aimed at the monsters. While being protected by the shield bearers, the archers can stop the monsters from getting close. In front, the group equipped with various weapons is waiting. As soon as their true forms are revealed, the protagonist raised his sword and said their time has come. With that, he was the first to get close enough to them. He called the elite attack team to charge immediately, and they did so. That command made everyone start attacking the monsters that revealed their true forms. The protagonist showcased all his skills against those ferocious creatures. He noticed they blended into the darkness, but when exposed, they were weak. The order was to eliminate as many monsters as possible. He asked Jillian to draw their attention and block their attacks, while the mad dog attacked everyone, taking down as many as possible. He avoided being cornered by those creatures, which could be very dangerous in larger numbers. He relied on Belinda's support, who would create many opportunities in extreme areas. So the protagonist's plan is progressing very smoothly. Everything is going well. Belinda, the young lord, called, and the reason is very simple. A group of those monsters has gathered and is heading towards you with all their strength. The protagonist knows that this elite attack team should take them down as much as possible. The light intensifies, revealing everyone's true faces. Meanwhile, the snipers have significantly reduced their numbers. The shield bearers have stopped those monsters from attacking the next team. At some point, they became exhausted and could no longer continue after hours of fighting. When they let their guard down for a moment, The monsters attempted to swallow the shield-bearer's team. Before that could happen, the captain's sword swung horizontally, and the entire elite team arrived just in time to prevent disaster. With that, the leader looked at them and praised their efforts for enduring for so long. Everyone smiled broadly upon seeing that the young prince had arrived to save them. The order was to disperse around all the remaining monsters. They must not let any escape. This is the time for the final counterattack. Therefore, a herd of those monsters gathered and tried to retreat. The protagonists realized they were fleeing, but it was strange that they started to withdraw before being surrounded. He noticed that the extreme teams could act quickly, so he asked Belinda to find their leader. He designated that it was the one with horns on his head, different from the others because he was the one giving orders. However, he was asked if it would be better to let them escape since they could come back with a larger group. This time they have the advantage of catching the enemy by surprise. Next time they won't have a chance. Belinda, hearing the young prince's orders, realized he was right and smiled. As she noticed that he had completely changed from before, a useless noble, she understood this. She would follow the given orders and find the leader, tying a rope to a tree. With the intention of charging forward as fast as possible, she planned to search through the crowd. The one with the horns on his head was not hard to identify. Because he had horns like a unicorn, Belinda threw her weapon in his direction. The intention was clear, to immobilize the leader so he couldn't give orders to the others anymore. While immobilizing him, she shouted to the young prince that she had found him, and immediately pulled him. The protagonist dashed in the direction Belinda indicated. Where the enemy leader was standing, he was firmly positioned, ready to take down as many enemies as possible along with the leader, utilizing the path. He began to eliminate all the enemies trying to get close to the leader to take him out. As he took down the leader, the others began to retreat as if they didn't know what to do. The protagonist shouted that the leader was defeated and everyone should finish the rest relatively easily. The shield bearers were now protected because they had strength and confidence in their leader to attack. The red-haired person also ordered and wanted all the mercenaries in his group to advance. As soon as possible, he didn't want to lose to an old man while Gizlane was cleaning up everywhere he went. The night dragged on, but it finally began to lighten. Signs of sunlight appeared as time eliminated the last of that race. He praised everyone's work, saying that victory only comes from unity and cooperation. With everyone doing their part in the plan, they proudly raised their weapons. Showing that they were the best, Gordon was proud of his muscles. And how he had influenced the shield bearers, Belinda was still acting as a protector, and wanted to know if the young lord was injured. He asked Belinda to count how many people were still there. Because some had disappeared, he ordered them to incinerate the corpses of those monsters, so the stench would prevent others from appearing when the mad dog didn't know why. It was the old man who explained while looking back. The protagonist saw the red-haired girl start teasing the old man but knew that a great friendship would arise from it. He thought it had been 10 days since they entered the monster forest. According to the map, the extreme teams had been eliminated, and the dangers along the way they had mapped out had passed. All that was left was to reach the ruined rock vein. He looked towards the horizon and saw the sun. The protagonist looked at everyone and realized that the journey was almost over. Belinda returned after counting the people. She reported that the servants were intact, but among the others, 3 had disappeared. The red-haired girl just teased Gizlane, claiming that none of his team were missing, because he was a capable leader. Oddly enough, they found no evidence that the missing people had been eliminated. However, among the disappeared, they noticed that the one who always talked about running away was not among them. Likely, the 2 idiots had run off with him. Clearly now they were being reckless. Alone in the monster forest, and that was exactly what had happened. The 3 were running, looking back and seeing that the battle seemed to be over. The man causing chaos continued to shout for everyone to run as fast as they could. While the monsters were distracted, looking back, the man felt fear and nearly fell. He was scared when seeing the 2 people in front of him trembling, but he kept shouting that they weren't listening. One of them trembled and pointed behind, asking him to look before adding. Their large eyes looked like a giant creature was targeting them for an immediate attack. It was a colossal snake lying among the stones, which the protagonist had tried to approach. It would catch its prey and place them in its nest, just like it had done with those it caught before, into that nest to join the other skeletons. The gaze of that monster was intense and displayed great brutality. The training in the camp continued along with the protagonist, and activities went on as usual. They continued chopping wood and clearing paths as they moved forward. Everyone, including the protagonist, was equipped with tools to chop as many trees as possible. The red-haired girl observed those mercenaries and thought that this was the first time she saw them so disciplined. Gizlane seized the opportunity, saying that they were different from someone he knew. The red-haired girl asked the protagonist if they would fire those mercenaries after the expedition, because he felt it would be a waste to abandon them. The protagonist explained that he intended to hire them as his soldiers because regular mercenaries didn't go through many battles. These ones were in perfect condition. Their levels were suitable. Their physical strength was as well, and they had been trained with discipline. At that moment, someone approached to talk to the red-haired girl, reporting that the assigned tasks had been completed. He looked at the protagonist and said that the sending effect was working well. Since no other creatures approached, he looked ahead and said, "It seemed that nothing else would appear on their path." The protagonist looked forward, hoping everything was going according to plan, but he didn't believe things would be that easy. From above, Belinda had arrived, who had surveyed the areas ahead. As she descended, the protagonist asked her if she saw anything. She replied in panic that she had seen. Looking at her face as she spoke, he realized she was very agitated. Noticing that unusual reaction from his longtime maid, he ordered everyone to clear the path as quickly as possible. He shouted that their destination lay ahead, which surprised everyone. The protagonist and his 3 close members were very excited when they finally found what they had been searching for. Others thought it couldn't be seen. Too many magical stones were in front of them. The protagonist remained calm. This was the final destination of the expedition, or at least what he believed. A large vein of magical stones was something he had read about in an article from his previous life. The red-haired girl couldn't believe that something so valuable was located in the middle of that wild forest. With that, the old man said, the protagonist always had something in hand. While Melinda smiled and hugged him, everyone stared at the pile of stones in awe, eager to rush in and collect them. However, the order they received through the dust was completely opposite. Someone said no one would leave that place. The protagonist looked closely and saw a figure in the mist. It was one of the missing mercenaries. His appearance was strange, and he said this would be the end for all of them. The mercenary was known as Manus and was now acting very oddly. The other mercenaries didn't understand why that man was there since he had gone ahead and pretended to vanish. As everyone tried to approach, they noticed the protagonist channeling mana into his sword. He ordered everyone to step back because there was a danger they hadn't noticed. The protagonist, always on high alert, he immediately sensed something was off. He swung his sword to disperse the mist, revealing what was hidden beneath. With that, everyone saw piles of monster skulls and other skeletons. They realized there were so many bones that it was hard to see the ground. There were also some remnants of humans, making it clear that everyone had to stay on high alert. The protagonist believed they wouldn't be able to mine in peace. He also noticed a type of toxic gas emanating from the corpses. Mixing into the atmosphere, the issue was something the protagonist noticed. There was nothing about this in the journal. He urged everyone to pay attention and prepare for battle. As he said this, a gigantic snake appeared right in front of him. It was enormous and opened its mouth wide. The protagonist gripped his sword tightly and warned everyone to shoot quickly. At first, everyone was terrified by the size of the reptile. They needed to follow orders immediately as the protagonist lunged to attack the giant snake. He relied on his agility to dodge. He circled the massive creature, searching for a weak point to strike. He thought that if he attacked directly at its skull, it might be more effective. But when he tried to stab it, he realized that even with magic, he couldn't make a scratch. This was also noticed by Gillian and the red-haired girl as they observed the battle from below. The problem was that the scales of the giant snake were as tough as steel. From its mouth, it spat out a large amount of venom aimed at the protagonist. Luckily, he realized it would hit him and managed to dodge. Only his cloak got hit. The snake was preparing to attack with its tail. He quickly noticed the movement. He mentally prepared himself while remaining on high alert, but almost got hit. The large reptile was very fast, and he realized as the tail came towards him again, the reptile seemed satisfied. Thinking it had executed its attack, little Belinda believed so too. Screaming for her little master, the mercenaries began swinging their weapons at the giant snake. To try to move it, however, everyone had to be very careful, because the giant snake could throw them far away. Seeing the mercenaries somewhat paralyzed, Gillian had to intervene. He grabbed some people who were about to be slaughtered and ran with them. Meanwhile, Belinda pulled others with her weapon like her whip. The leader Cerberus also responded as best as he could. To protect his mercenaries, cries for help echoed from all directions. Everyone wanted to know if the Lord was attacked by the snake. They didn't know he was in a position nearly safe, because she hadn't been able to remove him, seeing this with their own eyes. No doubt, that creature was the mistress of the magical stone vein. The large red python was the master of that place. It was one of the monsters marked as untouchable. In that expedition, it was surprising that it lay deeper in the forest. The chance of winning was almost zero. Retreating and waiting for an opportunity would be more reasonable. However, he decided not to waste time. He needed those stones and picked one up. He made a decision. If he gave up at that moment, everything he had been through would be in vain. He decided to end that snake and activate his mana flow. After opening his third heart, he planned to face the giant snake. It was a choice between his destiny and surrendering to failure, something unimaginable to him. Even in front of that terrifying monster, it had tried to attack him multiple times. He had no regrets about attacking. He struck even knowing it wouldn't be easy to pierce its scales. When he used his third heart, he realized he could scratch the surface of its scales. With that, he inflicted a serious wound. He couldn't let his guard down for even a moment. When he noticed she was about to attack him with her tail, he reacted just in time to defend himself with his sword. The weight she brought down on him was heavy, but he tried to protect himself as best as he could. Seeing that she had succeeded in restraining him with her tail, she now tried to bite him with her fangs. After he struck one of her eyes, she became furious and attempted to attack in every way possible. He knew that no matter what happened, there were battles that were unavoidable. He thought of his father with all the responsibility on his shoulders, and that gave him strength. He also thought of all those who were counting on him, and he believed that with determination, he could succeed. This was the right moment to fulfill his role as the one who would lead everyone. So, he charged at the snake, not caring about exhausting his body by using his third heart. He looked at the gigantic snake with its massive body and red scales. No matter how he looked, he couldn't see any serious wounds on her side. He thought that keeping the third heart open for too long would put him at risk if he continued like this. His mana would run out before he could kill the monster. He noticed others had shown up to help just in time. Belinda looked at him and asked if he was okay and if he was hurt while the other two stood in front. She begged him to protect himself while they would hold the monster for as long as possible. He insisted that everyone should leave because it was too dangerous and he could handle it himself. Belinda couldn't believe what she was hearing, and even the mercenaries couldn't believe he would handle it alone. Julian looked at him seriously and asked why he was doing this. He replied that even he couldn't guarantee their safety. Against a monster of that kind, he warned that he couldn't risk losing all of them. Nevertheless, Belinda didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay and help. She looked at him and thought that going this far was already a wonderful miracle. She can't understand why he insists on continuing, but he seems unwavering in his decision. Grabbing the sword and commanding, at that moment the giant serpent unleashed a massive amount of its venom. He became furious and ordered everyone to leave the area immediately in a very serious tone. People started to run to protect themselves and the young duke from the venom the snake was spraying at them. Now he had to come up with a different strategy as he realized they wouldn't retreat. But when the mercenaries shouted that they would fight alongside the young duke, they began to see him as an equal and knew their survival depended on him. The red-haired man leaned the large sword on his shoulder and said that if they could kill the monster, everything there would belong to them, and Belinda also said she would never abandon the young duke, and Gillian would create a distraction to open a gap. They wanted him to believe in them. Just as they believed in the potential of the young duke, in light of that argument, he couldn't say anything. He just looked at everyone and explained that the giant snake was unusual. He made them think about how its venom was lethal and that its red scales couldn't be pierced. He told everyone that if the snake attacked even once, they would die instantly. Despite that, Belinda did not back down. She stared at the giant snake, saying that he would take it down and strike its other eye. Then he raised his sword and called everyone from the Monster Forest expedition to eliminate the monster together and return home. That gave all the mercenaries renewed courage, and now they had a real reason to fight. Even though he moved forward to face an enraged giant red snake, none of them would back down. The protagonist, along with his three main members, moved with the intent to attack and find a weak point. The red-haired person used his power to pierce one of the giant snake's eyes. After that hit, it became extremely enraged and began to whip its tail wildly. Gillian also struck, embedding her axe into the spot where it was coiling. Meanwhile, the protagonist rushed in to deliver another strike that he had planned to be fatal. As soon as he pierced it with his sword, the giant snake, despite knowing the future, felt everything was going according to plan, but now the real warriors stood beside him. If he didn't act, everyone would die, so he joined them, and they all attacked the giant snake at once. He didn't want anyone to face such a huge risk, so he charged toward it while the third gate was still open. He was the only one who knew the future of that place, so he couldn't let all that property fall into someone else's hands. With determination, he lunged into the mouth of the giant snake, shocking and horrifying everyone witnessing. Someone thinks the snake swallowed you whole. That's part of your plan. It includes attacking the snake from the inside out, and the plan is going smoothly. They can see his sword piercing through the snake, and then he appears covered in the beast's venom. The three main allies can hardly believe he pulled off such a dangerous move. Gizlane knows he is the future of Pertium and won't give up. He plans to seize more of those rune stones. Meanwhile, at the castle, Ven slams his hand down on the table. Thinking a betrayal has occurred, someone has ignored the Lord's orders. He decides to enter the dangerous forest, regardless of what Albert thinks about it. He can't understand the young Lord's actions. They seem illogical. But the steward says there's no reason to speculate when the young Lord has been in the forest for over 15 days. Now, the commander of the soldiers has assisted him along with the soldier Ricardo, who is imprisoned for treason. Meanwhile, the Lord listens to all discussions in the meeting and remains silent. He appears very worried about his son's actions. The knight captain says it's urgent, and they need to go with him. The count wants to know what's happening with Ronald, and they inform him that young Gizlane, after going through too much in that savage forest, is returning victorious. Upon arrival, he meets key members present at the castle. At that moment, he can't avoid sharp and suspicious gazes, just like the other three. His father is also watching. Now, the young lord must explain everything, but he only tells his father that he just returned. The count is sure he has blocked his son's access to the monster forest. Gizlane apologizes but emphasizes that it was an extremely necessary measure for the common good. Everyone present at the meeting believes there is nothing that can justify such a need, and they can't understand that the knight captain explained that entering the monster forest is considered an unforgivable crime. However, the young man explains that as everyone can see, he is alive, and the monsters did not attack. No one there believes the young man is lying or using words just to justify himself. Still, Albert asked if he found the trip to the forest exciting or dangerous. He replied that nothing happened during the trip, so he doesn't see it as a big deal. But there's one thing that can't be overlooked, and he then pulls out a paper from his pocket. As he picks it up to read, he notices it's a letter from Count Rayfold. Reporting everything he has done, it also mentions that he extorted a large sum from her, Amelia, by threatening her. Ronald says that because of this, the Count of that area will cut off the support they have received, the protagonist reads, and realized it was a statement written directly by Count Rayfold, who disliked her. He knew taking her money wouldn't be difficult, but finding out she had allied with the enemy was shocking. He placed his hand on the letter, thinking that Amelia knew everything wasn't over yet when she sent the assassin. However, he realized that time was not on his side and that he needed to act carefully and quickly. Ronald asked if he had anything else to say to the group waiting attentively, the old man with white hair and a mustache. He said he would have to return the money he had taken. The captain of the knights seemed displeased. Because that amount was enough to cover the expenses for the guild, the young man explained that he had spent all the money. Leaving everyone in the room confused and silent, he said he had used it all for the expedition to the monster forest. For it to succeed, Ronald couldn't believe he had spent all the money on a palace, dangerous expedition. The young man apologized, saying he had no other choice, and wouldn't do anything differently, at least he hoped. The captain of the knights would understand his situation during those tough times. Suddenly, the captain grabbed his collar and said he had been too reckless. He accused the crown heir of trying to destroy his own territory with his poor decisions. The old man pointed at him and said he had lost his place in society. The young man urged everyone to stay calm and promised that he would repay the entire necessary amount himself. He said he would clear the debt, which made his father curious to know how. The young man called for Belinda and asked her to come into the room with a small box. The young woman entered carrying a small box that immediately caught everyone's attention. Gizlane stood up and commented that if he just wanted to go into the forest, he wouldn't have spent all the money when the young woman opened the box. Everyone was overwhelmed by the dazzling light of the green stones inside. The main character explained that he had been searching for high-grade rune stones and that this box was full of such stones. Now everyone was amazed to see the top-quality stones with surprising value. It was the old man who wanted to expel and treat the rabbit like a criminal. Now admiring these stones, he didn't even mention that he had mined those stones in the forest. Proving that his expedition had truly been effective, Ronald held the stones in his hands and said that even if they were unique, their value still wouldn't be enough. The young man said that those stones alone wouldn't be sufficient, but the rest would cover all debts. With that, he explained that the camp had been mining day and night, gathering precious resources. They also had the bodies of the monsters killed during the mining process. In the forest, everyone present at the meeting along with the Lord could now see everything that the young man had achieved in the past 15 days. The old man, with white hair, couldn't believe that the young man had done all of this in such a short time. The Lord wanted to know from Belinda if everything was gathered in a single expedition, and she confirmed that they had to face giant monsters to reach the stones, and what she showed was only a small part. The young man said he had spent a lot to help his homeland, and that everything would be used for the state. He whispered to the Lord, estimating that the amount would be enough to pay off all outstanding debts. Everyone looked at the young man, who to some extent had become their savior and beacon of hope. Those who had previously shouted at him were now patting his shoulder with full respect and admiration. He received compliments and was asked if he was tired after the arduous and dangerous expedition. Even the knight captain, who had been harsh and rude before, was now overflowing with praise and admiration. The first request of the young noble was for the commander of the armies to be released along with soldier Ricardo. Secondly, they would continue to restrict access to the monster forest to prevent dangerous rumors. They couldn't allow unnecessary rumors to spread, as that would cause serious problems for the state. Finally, he himself would recruit and manage the Mercenary and Pertium security forces. Even after his achievements, they still found it difficult to let him command. In a personal and powerful army, they weren't sure if that young noble was making serious mistakes. With such risky decisions, instead of apologizing for his mistakes, he's trying to manipulate the situation to maintain their support, but he admits that Albert was wrong. He says he only set conditions to keep their support. If anything gets interfered with even slightly, they will suffer financial losses, and they can't afford that. Even though Ronald asked his brother to intervene, he just observes while his son negotiates, and his team shows up calling him boss. Wanting to know the next orders for the mission, now everyone is gathered, and notices he's in the middle of an important negotiation. Jillian reports that the transport of the magic stones is almost complete and waiting for orders. The red-haired girl also talks about the completed missions. Announcing that the trees have been successfully removed, he asks them what they plan to do with the giant python. Caught during the difficult expedition, he's informed that the python will be disassembled. With the venom and other parts stored properly, his father sees his son's progress, calls Ronald back and remarks that the presence of mercenaries is notable. They are filming from a distance and still can't understand how the young noble exudes so much power and control. The Count looks at his son. Realizing that he is a great negotiator with a promising future, he notes that they have formed an elite unit and asks if they really are such a specialized force. He continues to say that getting the mercenaries to follow orders is something everyone should recognize and appreciate. The protagonist doesn't want his father to talk about the mercenaries like that because they are very important. Without them, the expedition would never succeed and everything would fail. The Count says he has seen everything necessary and calls everyone back to the castle. With his son, he says this time he will let it go. But he won't tolerate any mistakes or disobedience next time. Gizlane knows this is her father's subtle way of congratulating him. Without drawing attention, the protagonist knows that one day he will inherit that whole place and become a great leader. The Lord says that one day he will hold the title of North Wolf God. A special honor, he knows that title is given to the Count of Pertium, who defended the kingdom of Lucania with courage. Nevertheless, his father is just a man with weak military power and a ravaged nation. Even so, he fought relentlessly, protecting everything at the cost of his own life. He knows his father had a tragic and painful death that no one even remembers. The mercenaries were tired and thought it was finally time to rest a bit. After everything, however, the protagonist said it wasn't time to relax yet, and asked them to prepare everything to leave as soon as possible. To ensure progress continued and the goals were achieved, even Gizlane thought the young man had pushed himself too far and needed to rest urgently. However, Belinda said it was difficult to detox his body from all the toxins he has absorbed. The protagonist simply places a hand on her shoulder and asks her to continue trusting him. He looks deep into her eyes and says he will always rely on her, as he always has. In that way, he has convinced the three main members to stay by his side. Steadfast and confident in his leadership, he knows that news of the rune stones will spread very quickly throughout the kingdom. That's why they need to prepare as soon as possible. Although he is very tired, he thinks that once they reach a level where no one dares to challenge them, then they can finally rest. His body has exhausted and after a few steps he has fallen to the ground, unable to continue. Our video ends here. If you liked it, please like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Goodbye.